Chapter 1. Xueqi sat on the modified bus and looked out the window at the rolling mountains. The summer solstice had just passed, and the mountains were full of vitality. After living in the city for a long time and seeing such scenery, his gloomy mood due to his career not going well was much better. Originally, Xueqi planned to call a few friends to go on a long trip to relax, but he didn't expect to meet Xueqi, his old classmate from the same hometown who studied archaeology, and was dragged to go with him. This trip was to a relatively remote mountain village. It was said that something from the Stone Age had been discovered there. A group of people had already gone there, and this was the second group. Xueqi listened to his old classmate talk about primitive skulls, stone tools, and rock murals. He even took out a few pictures to explain in detail. Researchers were like this. Once they got in, it was difficult to pull them out. Although Xueqi didn't understand, he still listened to him respectfully. The paper was filled with rock paintings that had been discovered during archaeological research. Xueqi looked at them and felt that they weren't as good as his nieces and nephews who were in kindergarten. The lines on the drawings were relatively simple. He could roughly see that some people were holding tools to hunt. There were also some drawings of various animals, but he didn't know what the rest were. "This is a drawing of a sheep? But this goat is way too big," said Xueqi as he pointed at a picture. The picture depicted a sheep with long and huge curved horns. There was also a person holding a bow and arrow beside it, but the proportions didn't seem normal. The person's head only reached the sheep's back. The next few pictures were the same. The rabbit's body proportions were similar to a lion's. There was also the picture of a horse on the left. The horse's tail was drawn too short. Of course, not every picture had the same proportions. The rock murals of different periods found in different provinces and regions had different styles. There were some at the back that were drawn close to reality. In the picture, a group of people hunting with dogs could be seen. Flipping further back, there were a few color prints that could be seen even more clearly. This picture is even more exaggerated. The antlers are too big. And this person, the person in the picture just now only reached the sheep's back. But the person in this picture is actually only a little taller than the deer's legs. And what's that at the bottom right corner? An 8-legged crocodile? Xueqi really couldn't appreciate the style of primitive people. Primitive humans might not have paid much attention to this aspect. Xueqi explained. So what you're saying is that the primitive humans didn't use realistic proportions when they painted, but instead used exaggerated techniques? Xueqi asked. Probably. Xueqi scratched his head. After all, the humans of that time period didn't pay much attention to aesthetics. It might have been purely a symbolic meaning. Just like how a researcher once speculated when he was researching a certain rock painting, the humans of that time drew these paintings of hunting on the cave walls or rocks. It might have been for the sake of letting the hunting warriors take a look before the tribe hunted so that they could have a plan in mind. Or perhaps there were some rituals that we don't know about. Especially those paintings drawn by witches. A witch. Xueqi imagined an old faker dressed in an unusual way. Hey, what's with that expression of yours? Let me tell you, witchcraft might not have a low status in the human community at that time. On the contrary, it might be quite high. I know, a faker. Xueqi nodded. Xueqi waved his finger and brought over a folder. There were some scanned copies of drawings inside. He pointed at some of the drawings and words and said to Xueqi, "If the totem consciousness is a manifestation of a person's personification of nature and their collective unity, then witchcraft is a manifestation of a person's impersonation of nature." The profession of witchcraft actually appeared as early as the Stone Age. Xueqi talked to himself about the research progress of the profession of witchcraft from ancient times to the present. He used professional terms and even quoted classics, making Xueqi's head hurt. Xueqi didn't know much about this aspect, nor was he interested. If it weren't for this old classmate from his hometown who studied archaeology, Xueqi wouldn't have known about this at all. In the past, when he heard people talk about archaeology, he would immediately think of those expensive antiques. However, Xueqi's research direction was even more antique than antiques. It was so ancient that not many people were interested in it. A few days ago, he heard the radio discussing whether Darwin's theory of evolution was correct or the hypothesis of extraterrestrial creation was correct. Xueqi had nothing better to do, so he listened to it. After listening to it, he put it aside and didn't think about it anymore. On the contrary, Xueqi knew that this childhood friend of his was very interested in ancient humans. When he was in middle school, He would often discuss with others about the ancient human remains that had been unearthed but mysteriously disappeared in modern history. You won't understand if I talk about the professional stuff, so let's talk about something simpler. Here. Xueqi used his finger to point at a picture and pointed at a certain place on the picture. Witchcraft is mentioned in inscriptions and bronze inscriptions, but it's like this. Xian looked at the place Xueqi was pointing at. It was a symbol that looked like the word work crisscrossed. In some of the unearthed ancient pottery clam heads, this kind of double work symbol appeared on them. Speaking of which, witchcraft also involved hunting, praying, rescuing, and other aspects. From a certain perspective, witchcraft could be considered scientists of that time. However, these are all speculations. Even if there are some records from ancient times, they might not be true. After all, people at that time loved to exaggerate. Isn't there a saying? History will never have the truth. Archaeology only excavates some corners. As for the real situation, who knows? The cave that was discovered this time is also related to witchcraft. It's the last few pictures you saw. The first batch of people who went there returned with the rock paintings. Double work symbols were also found in that cave, so they speculated that it might be the dwelling of a certain witchcraft. Last month, there was a short earthquake where the village was located. It was probably because of this that the cave was exposed. I've never heard anyone mention it before. Speaking up to this point, Xueqi closed the folder and carefully looked around. Seeing that his mentor and other fellow apprentices weren't paying attention, he lowered his voice and mysteriously said to Xian, "I heard that the first person who discovered the cave was a child. Moreover, according to the news from a fellow apprentice, the child who discovered the cave saw a strange watermelon-sized bug crawling out from the stones of his courtyard wall. The child was bold, so he followed the bug. In the end, the bug disappeared into the cave, and the child went back to tell the adults. Only then was the cave discovered." A watermelon-sized bug? Xian felt that this was absurd. Anyone who heard this for the first time would feel that it was too fake. That child lied? Xueqi shook his head. What's even stranger is that according to the first batch of people who went there were fossils of ancient creatures in the stones used to build the courtyard wall. Speaking up to this point, Xueqi paused, rubbed the goosebumps on his arms, and continued. The child who discovered the cave pointed out that there were fossils of ancient creatures in the stones where the watermelon-sized bug emerged. However, it wasn't complete, only a damaged part. However, according to the speculations of professionals, if that creature was still alive, it could indeed be as big as a watermelon. Moreover, its appearance wasn't too far off from what the child described. It sounds quite mysterious. However, only the child saw it. Didn't the others see a bug crawling out from their own walls? Xian was a bit interested. Xueqi shook his head. I don't know. I'll ask when we get there. In any case, we're almost there. When the group arrived at their destination, it was already 11:00 in the afternoon. Xian followed Xueqi and the others to eat a simple lunch before returning to the bus. Xueqi and the others were already impatient. They didn't rest after eating and planned to start work immediately. Xueqi had already told Xian about the things he needed to pay attention to. What things he couldn't touch, where he couldn't go, who he could look for if he needed help, etc. Xian already had a plan in mind. I'll tell you when we're done today. You can walk around first. The scenery here isn't bad. There are green mountains, blue skies, and clear water. After staying in the smoggy city for so long, you should come out to wash your lungs. After saying that, Xueqi took his tools and followed his instructor. Xian couldn't follow them, nor did he have much interest in following them. Xian was the only one left in the bus. Once the doors and windows were closed, it was rather quiet. These past few days, Xian hadn't slept well. On the way, he had only listened to Xueqi's narration. Now that it was quiet, he felt sleepy. When he woke up again, it was already 2:00 in the afternoon. Xian was just about to go out for a walk when he saw Xueqi, who was wearing work clothes, come over. He got on the bus to pick up a document. After that, he still had to rush over to the other side to continue working. However, before getting off the bus, Xueqi took out a stone the size of an egg from his pocket and tossed it to Xian. I picked it up in the cave. I saw that no one paid much attention to it, so I took it. It shouldn't be anything important. I can't give it to you as an antique. In any case, this stone is from the cave, and it looks quite glossy. Someone probably threw it there. I'll give it to you as a keepsake. This stone was near the entrance of the cave, but it was still some distance away from the core of the cave. The stone's quality was clearly different from the other excavated items, and it didn't have any markings. Therefore, the first batch of people who came over had placed their focus on the antiques and rock paintings from the Stone Age. No one paid attention to this stone near the entrance of the cave. Xueqi caught the stone that was tossed over and carefully examined it in his hand. It didn't feel any different from other stones. It was dark green in color and shaped like an egg. Its surface was quite glossy, as if it had been deliberately polished. It didn't look very ancient. Even if it wasn't an antique, it wasn't bad to play with or use as an ornament. Xueqi didn't pay it any mind and played with it in his hand for a while. For some reason, he felt that this stone wasn't warm enough. He held it in his hand for more than 10 minutes, but it was still cold. After thinking about it, Xueqi took out a lighter and used it to burn the stone. Logically speaking, the place that came into contact with the flame should have burned his hand, but the truth was that after burning it, it was still as cool as before. After looking around, Xueqi took a fruit knife from the table and placed a piece of paper on top of it. He planned to use the knife to scrape off some of the stone's fragments and take it to the archaeological vehicle to help examine it. However, Xueqi used the knife to scrape the stone, but there wasn't a single mark on it. He couldn't even drill a single mark with the knife. Fire couldn't heat it up, and a knife couldn't cut it. It really was a strange stone. Xueqi took the stone and got off the bus, planning to let Xueqi take a closer look at it later. The place where the car was parked was already very close to the village. It was just that the road ahead wasn't easy to walk on. Some of the villagers in the village went to work, while the more idle ones went to the newly discovered cave to watch the excitement. Thus, when Xueqi entered the village, he only saw 2 or 3 people walking around. Outside the village, there was a 2-meter-tall stone wall. It was said that it was built a few decades ago to guard against wild beasts. The stone came from the mountains, but in recent years, there weren't any large wild beasts around, so no one paid attention to these stone walls. At a glance, he could see large chunks of stone on the stone wall. They were very old and had a sense of desolation. Xueqi played with the stone in his hand and stared at it. Xueqi heard that the stone on the stone wall had fossils of ancient creatures. He recalled the watermelon-sized bug that Xueqi had mentioned. Just as he was about to shift his gaze away, Xueqi suddenly discovered that a snake-like thing had appeared on the stone wall. It was still wriggling. It was as thick as a water tank, and its scaly patterns were suffused with a cold light. Even though it was a few meters away, Xueqi felt a bone-chilling chill. It shocked Xueqi so much that he almost jumped up. However, when Xueqi blinked and looked again, he discovered that there was nothing. The stone wall was still that dilapidated stone wall that had been exposed to wind, sun, and rain for a long time. Was it an illusion? Xueqi looked at the other parts of the stone wall. Then, his gaze fell on a gap in the stone wall. There was a large rock that had been left behind after the stone wall collapsed. The smaller one had been picked up by the villagers to build their own walls, while the larger one had been left here. At that moment, Xueqi saw a small green sprout emerge from the rock. The sprout rapidly sprouted leaves and grew taller. At the same time, several vines extended in all directions. The gap that was originally more than 3 meters long was covered by the vines and branches in the blink of an eye. His nose seemed to be filled with the fragrance of plants. Xueqi took a few steps back and took a deep breath. When he focused again, he discovered that the vines and branches had all disappeared. The stone wall was still there, and the large bare rock was on the ground. Sensing something strange in his hand, Xueqi looked down at his hand that was holding the rock. The rock that couldn't be burned by fire and cut by knives instantly turned into sand and fell through the gaps between Xueqi's fingers. When the last grain of sand fell, Xueqi's vision turned dark. Chapter 2. In the cave, there were about 20 children lying around. 7 or 8 of them were covered by a thin piece of animal skin with a few holes. The others who were not covered either had their own animal skin covers or were curled up on the side. Regardless of whether they were covered by a blanket or curled up on the side, they were all sleeping soundly. Because it had been a long time since the cave was cleaned, and there were many people sleeping, there was an unpleasant smell in the cave. Yang Guang was able to sneak in through the ventilation openings around the cave, barely allowing some light to enter the dark cave. Near the edge of the cave, under the vent, A child wearing tattered animal skin was sleeping there. However, unlike the other children, there was a big dog sleeping next to him. It was almost as big as him. Xueqi opened his eyes and looked at Yang Guang, who was already up to his shoulders. He rubbed his eyes and got up to tidy up the hay under him. Seeing Xueqi's movements, the large dog that had its eyes closed quickly got up and obediently squatted next to him so that Xueqi could tidy up the hay. After tying up the hay, Xueqi carried the hay in one hand and the dog's leash in the other and walked out of the cave. He had inexplicably come to this primitive place and become a little brat in the wilderness. The original body of Xueqi's body was very thin and weak, probably due to illness. It had been more than half a year since Xueqi woke up in this body. No matter how uncomfortable he was, he could only grit his teeth and bear with it. Staying alive was the most important thing. Xueqi had never thought that he would really come to such a place. This place was very different from the primitive tribes of the Stone Age that he knew. The appearance of the people here was nothing special, but their nature was different. Have you ever seen an ordinary person holding a water tank-sized rock with one hand and strolling on the street like nothing happened? Have you ever seen an ordinary person jump 3 stories high without the help of other tools? Have you ever seen an ordinary person jump down from a tree that was more than 10 meters high and still stand steadily? In any case, Xueqi had never seen him in his previous life, but in this life, he could see him every day. As for the cave they just came out of, its original name was Crouching Ox Cave, because the cave looked like a beaten ox. The name was given by the tribe's shaman. However, after nearly 1,000 years, the tribe multiplied and built their own houses outside. In the end, this cave was used to take in the orphans of the tribe. Hence, it was called Children's Cave by the people of the tribe. The children living there had no relatives to take care of them, and the people of the tribe were unwilling to take them in. In short, the Children's Cave was the tribe's orphanage. Ever since Xueqi had arrived here, he had not seen anyone from any other tribe. He had heard that the Yanjiao tribe was the only tribe in this mountain range. The isolated tribe lived a self-sufficient life. Xueqi walked slowly with the dog. It didn't take long for them to see wooden houses of different sizes. Some of them were made of wood, stone, grass, and mud. Compared to the former, the wooden houses were slightly larger and looked more solid. These houses could be considered as luxurious houses near the foot of the mountain. Whether it was the wooden houses or the wooden and stone luxurious houses, in Xueqi's eyes, they were unbelievably simple and crude buildings. However, after staying here for so long, Xueqi longed for a wooden house of his own. Unfortunately, it was not possible at this stage. At this time, some people had already come out to work. The men had already taken out their stone tools to polish so that it would be convenient for them to bring their stone knives out the next time they went hunting. The women also had their own jobs, such as sewing animal skins and drying food. When Xueqi passed by, many people's eyes drifted in his direction. They were not looking at Xueqi, but at the creature that Xueqi was holding. Their eyes were filled with greed and desire, and they swallowed their saliva. In their eyes, Xueqi was holding a large piece of meat, enough for them to eat several meals. The eyes of those who had gotten up early to work and were still hungry were green with envy. However, when they saw the thing on the neck, they reluctantly resisted the urge to snatch it. It was a witched plate, which meant that it belonged to the witch. They did not dare to touch it. In their eyes, Xueqi was just helping the witch look after the wolf. Yes, the wolf that followed Xueqi was actually a wolf. It was born in the mountains, but when it was young, it was found by a hunting warrior in the tribe and brought back for Xueqi to eat. At that time, the witch of the tribe happened to pass by and left a plate with the witch's pattern before leaving. Xueqi named the wolf Caesar, which was also the name of the dog that Xueqi had in his previous life. He had kept Caesar as a dog until now. The people here were very strange. They respected the witch very much, but after seeing the witch give a plate to Xueqi, their attitude toward Xueqi did not change much. The only difference was that they did not want to kill Caesar and eat it. As for other things, they did what they should do. After all, the witch did not ask them to help Xueqi. How could a big shot like the witch have the time to care about a child? After a long time, everyone got used to having a child with a wolf. Caesar had grown up from a cub that did not have all his teeth, and the witch had never appeared again. However, what puzzled the people in the Mountain Foot district was, why did Xueqi call Caesar a dog? What was a dog? This question did not last long, because no one cared about it. They were too lazy to care about it, and were busy with more important things. Food. Xian was already used to the surrounding gazes, and continued to walk while holding Caesar's hand as if nothing had happened. Even if the people in the tribe were greedy, they would not steal the witch's things. Just as Xueqi said, the witch's status in the tribe was very high. As for why the witch who lived in the noble district on the mountain and had a high status in the tribe, would give Xian, a person with a low sense of existence who slept in the child's cave, a precious plate, it could be attributed to a word that Xian had mentioned at that time, raise. At that time, Xian had said that he would raise Caesar, who was still a wolf cub, a little older before eating it. However, the witch who happened to pass by, heard it and asked Xian to raise him. In order to prevent the people in the tribe from robbing him, the witch left behind a plate, which was hung around Caesar's neck. That witch was very interested in raising, but in the past half a year, that old man had never appeared. Therefore, Xian's impression of that old man was an irresponsible old faker. Was it easy to raise a wolf? Being stared at every day by the people around him with green eyes, without a strong psychological endurance, he would have gone crazy long ago. All in all, raising Caesar was purely a coincidence. Life was so difficult. Although the food in the child's cave was taken care of by the tribe, he was still hungry. Xian sighed helplessly, looked ahead, and then the corner of his eyes twitched. In front of him, there was a person carrying a stone stick, about 2 meters long and shaped like a baseball bat, but much thicker. This thing was heavy enough. According to Xian's standards in his previous life, even if he could carry it, it would be very difficult. However, that person was carrying it as if it was just an ordinary hoe, yawning leisurely as he walked up the mountain. He was probably going to discuss hunting matters with his hunting team. That was the people here, normal people. As for Xian, he belonged to the disadvantaged group, who had not awakened his totemic power. When he grew up to 10 years old and awakened his totemic power, he could be counted as an ordinary warrior in the tribe, who had the ability to go out and hunt. Totemic power was the only standard to determine whether a warrior could become a hunting warrior in the tribe. As for what exactly totemic power was, Xian did not know, but maybe he would know when the time came. At that moment, the man carrying the stone stick in front of Xian, who was still sleepy, did not notice that the leather shorts he was wearing were almost down to his knees. He was walking in broad daylight as if nothing had happened. The people around saw him and did not react. Xian tried to hold back, but still said, "The man carrying the stick in front, your pants are down." The man walking in front of him yawned and turned around when Xian shouted for the third time. He glanced at Xian, and his eyes stayed on Caesar for about half a minute. Then he looked down at his pants, calmly pulled them up, tied the rope, and continued walking up the mountain with the stick. Xian did not say anything more. For the people in the tribe, etiquette, justice, integrity and shame? What the hell is that? Was it edible? If it was not edible, then why did you say it? Chapter 3. Xian's destination was not to go all the way up the mountain, but to the back of the mountain along a gravel-strewn road. When they arrived at the other side of the mountain, they raised their eyes and looked into the distance. What entered their eyes was an endless stretch of forest. Among them, there were several bare hills with few plants, which were used by the warriors of the tribe for training. It was also the main source of stone tools used by the hunting warriors. The stones there were not suitable for plants to grow, but it was a very good place for training. Xian was now standing on a gravel field. The gravel was not formed naturally, but was broken by people. The useful stones that could be processed had already been picked up by the people of the tribe. The rest were useless debris, and no one would come here usually. It was very quiet, but he could hear the booming sounds coming from the nearby mountains. Xian had not seen the totem warriors train with his own eyes. He heard that the totem warriors were very destructive when they trained. Vulnerable people like Xian were not allowed to get close to them. Many people who went to watch without saying a word were accidentally injured. Looking back, Xian loosened the straw dog rope in his hand. "Go eat your noodles." Caesar, who could no longer hold himself back, immediately ran on the gravel. As he ran, he sniffed with his nose. When he smelled something, he used his forelimbs to dig quickly and vigorously in that place. After a while, he pulled out a worm that was as thick as an adult's thumb and about a foot long and ate it. Then he continued to look for the next one. Those worms were called stoneworms by the people of the tribe. They looked very similar to earthworms, but were much bigger. The one Caesar just ate was small. Xueqi had seen a stone worm as thick as an arm. He heard that there were bigger ones, but the bigger the stone worm, the deeper it was underground. Therefore, there were only small ones left on the surface. Stone worms tasted bad, and many people would have severe diarrhea after eating them. Therefore, the people of the tribe did not put stone worms on their menu. Therefore, Caesar, who was very interested in stone worms, took advantage of the opportunity. As a wolf, it was pitiful enough that it had to eat insects. Carrying the bundle of grass, Xueqi found a suitable place to dry the bundles of grass. He spread the bundles of grass out to dry so that he could sleep more comfortably when he returned to the cave at night. After laying the grass, Xueqi observed the surroundings. After confirming that there was no one else, he went to the side of a short tree at the edge of the gravel field. He pushed aside a layer of gravel on the ground and took out an extremely crude stone knife tied to his waist to dig. Soon, a stone bowl buried below was exposed. The stone bowl contained a piece of dried meat. Xueqi quickly took out the jerky and buried the stone bowl back in its original place. The jerky was only half the size of a palm. It was hard and had a fishy smell. If it was the Xueqi from his previous life, he wouldn't even give it a second look. But now, after experiencing real hunger for a long time, tasteless could also become a world delicacy. Look at how simple her life is. It's all because she's forced to. After eating something, she suddenly felt much more energetic. Xueqi stood up to stretch his muscles and bones. He did a few rounds of fitness boxing that he often practiced in his previous life. This was what Xueqi had to do every day. When he first woke up in this body was very weak. On the other side, Caesar was still digging for food, but he did not lower his vigilance. He paid attention to the surroundings and looked around from time to time. This was also the reason why Xueqi dared to take food directly. Otherwise, if other hungry people in the tribe found out, the meat would have to change owners. Xueqi was now alone and helpless. His arms and legs were thin, and his face was yellow, and he was weak at fighting. If it weren't for the experience he gained from his previous life and the ruthlessness he forced out after coming here, he might not even have the energy to walk around. After practicing a few rounds of fitness boxing, Xueqi stopped to catch his breath. But then he noticed that Caesar, who was pulling a stone worm out with its mouth, suddenly turned around. The sudden change of direction tore the stone worm in half. The half that was still underground quickly retracted back into the ground. Even if there was only half left, they could still grow back and continue to live after a period of time. And the half that was bitten by Caesar was twisting its body and violently whipping Caesar's mouth. Caesar did not eat the stone worm directly, nor did he pay attention to the stone worm's whipping. Instead, he stared in one direction and made a gurgling sound from his throat. This was a reminder to Xueqi that someone was coming. Caesar did not directly bare its fangs. Xueqi knew that the person who came should be someone he knew. Staring in that direction, Xueqi soon heard a very soft sound, like the wind blowing through the leaves on the ground. Gradually, a figure appeared in Xueqi's field of vision. It was a very tall and burly man, wearing simple clothes made of animal skin. The animal skin was of good quality and was only stained with a layer of stone chips. There were a few scars on the man's face, which added to his murderous aura. The parts of his body that were not covered by the animal skin were also scars of different sizes. A circle of stone tools hung from his waist. Those were carefully selected stones that were to be processed into stone tools. Those stones were different from the gravel under Xueqi's feet. Those stones were much harder than the ones under Xueqi's feet. After being made into tools, they would be more useful for hunting. They were much more advanced than the crude stone knife in Xueqi's hand. If they were exchanged for meat, the smallest rough embryo would be enough for Xueqi to eat for several days. Probably because he was used to sneaking around in the forest while hunting, he walked like this on a daily basis. Basically, there was no sound, and this was the result of him not being careful. If he really wanted to hide, Caesar might not be able to find him immediately, and Xueqi wouldn't even hear a little bit of sound. Caesar's gurgling sound was still coming out of his throat. The man looked at him, and Caesar immediately tensed up. He opened his mouth, revealing his 4 unusually long fangs. The half of the stone worm that fell on the ground was about to drill into the ground to escape, but he was not distracted. He just stared at the man. For the warriors of the tribe, wild beasts were just prey and food. Caesar naturally belonged to that category. Even if the man just glanced at Caesar and did not really want to kill him, His hunting instincts made him reveal a kind of dangerous aura after seeing a wild beast, which made Caesar very afraid. Seeing this, Xian had to be the first to speak. "Uncle Mai, good morning." The middle-aged man who was staring at Caesar turned his eyes from Caesar to Xian. When facing Xian, the knife-like aura that he showed because of Caesar was much more restrained, and did not make Xian feel too much pressure. In fact, most of the warriors in the tribe would not be too harsh when facing young children, unless those children provoked them first. Mai looked at Xian, and then looked at the marks left by Xian's fists and feet from the gravel floor. There was a smile in his eyes, but because of the scars on his face, his ferocious face did not soften much. Xian knew that Mai was kind, and was not as scary as he looked. Moreover, Mai and the father of this body used to be in the same hunting group, and had helped Xian a lot. "Xian, you came out so early? It's good to practice in advance," Mai said. People in the tribe did not have surnames, and most of them had single-character names. Probably for ease of remembering, Xian's original name was Xian. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Xian gradually got used to it. As for the way of addressing people, because there was a senior in the tribe who liked to call people "op" first, and then call them by their names. Later, the younger generation followed suit, and now, some people in the tribe still like to call people "ob" before their names. Of course, they would not be so casual with the seniors and some people with special status in the tribe. Among the people living at the foot of the mountain, including the children in the children's cave, they could not awaken their totemic power in their childhood, so they seldom came out to exercise. Basically, they ate and slept, and then ate again. At most, they would come out to play for a while. After all, exercise were very tiring, and they would get hungry easily. For the poor people living at the foot of the mountain, they would try to reduce their energy consumption as much as possible. Even the adults agreed that their children should exercise less. But obviously, Mai agreed with Xian's behavior more. Practicing now would benefit him in the future. "Uncle Mai, did you come back from the training ground?" Xian asked. "Yes." Mai nodded slightly. The warriors in the tribe did not have a fixed time for training. As long as they did not miss the hunt, they could arrange their time freely. "Uncle Mai, it seems that you are in luck this time. By the way, Uncle Mai, I heard from Lang Jie that it's your turn to go hunting tomorrow. I wish you all the best, and hope you can come back with a rewarding journey," Xian said. Lang Jie was a warrior in the same hunting group as Mai, and Caesar was adopted by Lang Jie for Xian. Lang Jie meant ground baobab in the tribe's language. He was just like his name. Mai heard Xian's words and answered with a smile. Tomorrow they would go hunting, and it might last for a few days. So he had to go back and rest, so that he could go hunting in his best condition tomorrow. Mai did not say much and planned to leave. After taking 2 steps, Mai stopped, turned around and shouted "Xian." Xian looked at Mai, and saw Mai pour out a piece of dried meat from the animal skin bag and throw it to him. Warriors would bring their own food when they went for training. After all, the training ground was mostly rocks, with few plants and even fewer animals. In order to make up for the loss of physical strength, they would prepare food in advance. The dried meat Mai gave Xian was prepared beforehand, and there was still a little left. He planned to eat the last piece on the way back, but he did not expect to meet Xian here, so he gave it to him directly. Xian did not have the ability to go hunting, and the tribe did not allow them to go hunting. This was one of the ways the tribe protected the children. "Thank you, Uncle Mai," Xian said. People in the tribe did not have enough food, especially in this season. Not everyone was as generous as Mai. After giving the meat to Xian, Mai said, "My training ground is on the mountainside, where you can see the sun set." After telling Xian the specific training location and telling him to be careful, Mai left. When Mai's figure disappeared, Caesar also relaxed. He looked at the ground and found that half of the stone worm had already escaped. He dug the ground to vent his anger, and used his nose to smell carefully. He wanted to continue tracking and catch the escaped prey again. However, Xian did not plan to let him have his way. Mai gave him a chance to fill his stomach today. He buried the dried meat in the stone bowl, and covered it with stone chips to camouflage it. Xian looked in the direction Mai pointed at, and called Caesar over. "Let's go, Caesar. Let's do something big." Chapter 4. Since it was where most of the stone tools were produced in the tribe, there would naturally be a lot of stones suitable for processing. However, it was also where the totemic warriors trained, so naturally, the totemic warriors would have the first choice. After them, the weaker ones like Xueqi would go there to pick up the leftovers. Pick up the leftovers sounded shabby, but it fit the current situation. Generally speaking, when the others in the tribe wanted to pick up the leftovers, they would do it when the sun was about to set. Only then would the warriors in the training ground rest. At other times, the training ground was very dangerous for those who had not awakened their totemic power. The flying stones smashed by the warriors' fists were no different from bullets to the weaker ones. However, with Mai's guidance, it would be much easier for Xueqi to get there. If he could find good stones, he could bring them back to exchange for many things. Of course, Xueqi would not let go of this opportunity. Xueqi led Caesar along the path that Mai had pointed out to him. Along the way, they could hear the sounds of explosions coming from several training hills. There were also some flying stones falling down, and bigger stones rolling down from other hills. If Mai had not told them the safest path in advance, it would have been much more dangerous to walk in this place. Xueqi casually brushed his messy hair, shook off some stones, and continued walking. Mai's training ground was close to the top of the mountain. The training ground of the totemic warriors here was not paved with smooth paths, so it was more difficult to climb up the mountain. By the time he reached the top, Xueqi's arms, palms, and feet were bleeding. Xueqi did not care about the wounds on his body. He would be fine after resting for 2 days. If he could find good stones, it would all be worth it. It took a lot of effort. If he had not eaten in the morning, Xueqi would not have had the strength to climb up the mountain. Stones of different sizes and shapes lay on the uneven ground. On the opposite side of the stone wall, there were some holes of different depths. There were traces of digging tools at the edges of the holes. Xueqi speculated that there were originally harder stones embedded here, but Mai dug them out and took them back to make hunting stone tools. Many very hard stones were not widely distributed on the mountain. Instead, they were formed in chunks. Some were on the surface of the mountain, while others were buried deep within the mountain. It was impossible for the warriors to split the mountain apart. Therefore, whether or not they could find the stone embryo they wanted depended entirely on their own luck. That was why Xueqi had said that Mai had good luck coming to the training ground this time. In addition to those holes, there were also some palm and fist prints on the stone wall. This was where Mai trained. The totem warrior's fists were really hard. If it were Xueqi, even if it was the weakest part of the stone wall, he would still be able to break it with a single punch. Mai had already picked out the hardest stones with the best appearance. The stones that Mai wanted were naturally of higher quality. Of course, Xueqi would be able to use the ones left behind. No longer thinking about it, Xueqi asked Caesar to be on guard while he hurried to look for stones that could be exchanged for food. If he was late, someone would definitely come and rob him. Xueqi picked up a half-foot-long rectangular stone. Its shape was not regular, it was not big, and it was not heavy. However, Xueqi knew that the heavier the stone, the better the quality. There were many types of stones that Xueqi had never seen in his previous life. Even some of the common knowledge he had in his previous life was useless in this world. What Xueqi had now was all the new knowledge that he had accumulated over the past 6 months. He did not know how to quickly identify the quality of a stone. His contact with stones was limited, and he was not like those experienced totem warriors who could identify the quality of a stone at a glance. Therefore, Xueqi adopted a stupid method. He first looked at the shape of a stone that was suitable for processing, then cut it with his stone knife to see the depth of the mark on the stone. Generally speaking, the shallower the mark, the better the quality of the stone. Xueqi swung his knife at the edge of the stone. After a crisp sound, there was only a shallow mark on the stone where the knife had been cut. Seeing this, Xueqi was delighted. This stone could be processed into an arrowhead or spearhead. As for what kind of shape it would be, that was up to the stonemason. Xueqi only needed to take it to the stonemason to exchange for food. Putting the stone into the rough animal skin bag that he carried with him, Xueqi planned to continue his search. However, Caesar noticed something strange. Xueqi carefully moved to Caesar's side and looked in the direction that Caesar was pointing. There were 3 children, about 10 years old, who were taller and stronger than Xueqi. These 3 old acquaintances were Xueqi's old rivals. They were the 3 little bastards who always tried to steal Xueqi's things. The 3 of them were not from the children's cave. They belonged to different families and lived in the mountain foot district. They often played together. Their battle with Xian had started a few days after Xian woke up in this world. At first, Xian's mentality had not changed yet. He would always bring them back to the world of his previous life. Even when he fought, he would show them mercy. The result of his mercy and pity was that Xian lost the jerky that he had worked so hard to obtain and was beaten into a pig's head by the three little bastards. Later on, Xian slowly changed. Just like the first day when he woke up and saw the children in the cave with wolf-like eyes, Xian's attitude and mentality towards them also changed. During the period of recuperation, Xian reflected deeply. After that, when Xian fought with them, he did not show them mercy. The rules of the tribe forbade them from killing each other, but as long as they were not beaten to death or disabled, no one would say anything. The people living in the mountain foot district had long been accustomed to such barbaric rules. Xian did not know what kind of special race the people in the tribe were. Although they looked no different from the people in his previous life, this race had a very strong recovery ability. After being beaten badly, they could walk again after 2 or 3 days of rest. After 1 or 2 months, they would still be as lively as a tiger. This was also why the people in the tribe did not care about this level of fighting. In their eyes, it was just a small matter, not as important as preparing food. As for the 3 children, Xian was not as tall or strong as them, and he did not eat as much as them. What could he use to fight with them? Fighting against many with few people also required strategy and hard work. Xian pressed Caesar's head down. Seeing Caesar still baring his teeth at the 3 children walking towards them, Xian pinched his mouth and said, "Wait." Looking around, Xian chose a hidden place to hide the stones in the animal skin bag that he had just picked. Then he quietly moved behind the stone wall and said to Caesar, "Later you will deal with Wild." Do you know Wild? A warrior once said that many of the wild beasts living in the depths of the forest were very smart, and those who were not smart were more difficult to deal with. Caesar belonged to the relatively smart species. This was not the first time they cooperated with each other. Even if Caesar could not tell the difference, it did not matter who he was going to deal with. Xian had already decided on the guy named Sai, the number 1 bastard. Once he got rid of him, things would be much simpler. Caesar lowered his body and quietly hid behind the big stone. This meant that he understood Xian's intention. Quietly approaching, fiercely subduing, and trying to kill with one blow seemed to be the nature of wild animals. In hunting they could always bring out this hidden nature, even if it was a wolf that was raised as a dog. Chapter 5. Of course, Xian didn't want Caesar to kill Mai with a single blow, because the tribe didn't allow it. However, Xian would never give up something that was already in his hands. Not to mention, it was these 3 little bastards who came, so there was no need to even mention it. While Xian was thinking about whether to use his fists or stones, the 3 kids walking up the mountain didn't notice that Xian was lying in ambush. Their attention was focused on other places, guarding against flying stones. They didn't know which was the safest way to go up the mountain, so they could only make a rough judgment based on the sounds they heard, and avoid the places where the sounds came from. "Jean, is it really this way?" Sai, who was walking in the front, avoided a falling stone from above, and looked at the people hiding behind him with anger. His eyebrows were almost raised. The timid kid named Jean shrank his neck and said, "It must be. My father is in charge of patrolling today. He saw Mai going down the mountain from here, so he should be here soon. Mai is a mid-level warrior, so he must have left a lot of good stuff." Sai snorted, kicked away the falling stone at his feet, and continued to walk forward. Seeing that the 3 kids were getting closer and closer, Xian held his breath, waiting for the best time. Xian didn't say much after they had cooperated for so many times. Seeing the right time, he made a gesture to Caesar, and then suddenly rushed to Sai. He clenched his right fist and smashed it at Sai's face. Sai's reaction wasn't slow either. He was the most powerful one among the 3, so when Xian suddenly attacked him, he didn't have time to completely dodge. He only had time to move sideways to avoid being punched in the nose, but his face suffered. Before he could react, his jaw was hit again. This series of attacks made Sai feel dizzy for a moment, and his body fell backward. But this was just the beginning. In just a moment, Xian's fists came one after another, and hit Sai's face one after another. Xian didn't choose to smash Sai with a stone in the end. Even if he was bare-handed, it was still not a pleasant feeling to be punched one after another. The people of the Yanjiao tribe were physically strong. Even the children who hadn't awakened their totemic power were much stronger than most of the people Xiaoxian had met in his previous life. Xiaoxian wanted to solve the problem quickly, so he didn't hold back. On the other side, when Xiaoxian rushed towards Sai, Caesar also pounced on Yi. Just as Xiaoxian had trained, Caesar did not bite Ye's flesh directly. Instead, Caesar directly bit the animal's skin and the straw rope around Ye's waist. Caesar did not let go and dragged Yi in other directions. Even though Caesar was still in its infancy, it could easily drag a 10-year-old child and run. Caesar did not let Yi cause any trouble for Xiaoxian, nor did it give Yi a chance to get up. As for the third person, Jean, he was the most timid of the three. He was not as fierce or strong as the other two, so Xiaoxian left him for last. When Xiaoxian suddenly rushed over to attack Sai, both Jean and Yi were shocked. Before Yi could help Sai, Caesar had already pounced on them. Looking at the sharp teeth in front of them, Jean and Yi almost peed in their pants. Yi, who was violently dragged away by Caesar, screamed for help. Jean, who was still in the same place, reacted after a while. Then he waved his wooden stick at Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian punched at Sai's face while paying attention to Jean's reaction. He dodged the wooden stick with his head and felt a burning pain on his back. He didn't dodge Jean's wooden stick immediately, but just punched Sai faster. Sai was 2 years older than Xiaoxian and stronger than Xiaoxian. However, he was still a kid who hadn't awakened his totemic power. Under Xiaoxian's storm-like attacks, he soon lost his fighting ability. Xiaoxian gasped for breath. If he couldn't finish the fight quickly, he would be the one to lose. In the past 6 months, he had suffered enough because of his hesitation. After solving the biggest problem, Xiaoxian rolled away to avoid the wooden stick that was coming at him, and looked at Jean. Xiaoxian's ferocious look was still there, which made the timid Jean's hand that was holding the wooden stick tremble a few times. Jean saw that Sai had been beaten to the ground, and it was impossible for him to fight back in a short time. He was obviously in a difficult situation, and he could still hear his panicked cries. Jean tightened his grip on the wooden stick and felt his heart skip a beat. When he met Xiaoxian's eyes, Jean unconsciously looked away. Seeing Jean's cowardly look, Xiaoxian knew that this guy had already decided to retreat. Xiaoxian straightened up and walked towards Jean step by step. Xiaoxian didn't move fast, but every step he took made Jean feel like he was being hammered in the heart. Every time he was hammered, Jean's face darkened. Between the two of them, Jean was the one with a weapon, and Jean was also the taller one. But judging from the momentum, it was obvious that Jean was completely at a disadvantage. When Xiaoxian was only 1 step away from Jean shivered and threw away the wooden stick in his hands. Then he quickly stepped back, which meant that he didn't want to fight with Xiaoxian and took the initiative to show his weakness. After fighting with each other so many times, Jean knew that as long as he made such a choice, Xiaoxian wouldn't continue to chase and beat him, even if he had hit Xiaoxian a few times. Sai, who just felt a little better, looked up and saw Jean's cowardly look. He was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Damn it, stupid teammate. When Sai found out that the attacker was Xiaoxian, he cursed in his heart, shit. The last few times they fought with Xiaoxian, they didn't win. This time, he didn't even have time to fight back before he was beaten to the ground. Sai felt so sullen. It wasn't easy for him to risk his life and come here to pick up some scraps, but he didn't expect Xian to be here as well, and he even came earlier than them. Did this guy have a wolf's nose? On the other hand, the three of them not only came late, but also lost the fight. Thinking of this, Sai looked at Xiaoxian as if there was a deep hatred in his eyes. Xiaoxian didn't pay attention to Sai anymore. He didn't want to let Jean go so easily today, but he didn't beat him down like he did to Sai. Instead, he kicked him to Sai. Picking up the stick that Jean dropped on the ground, Xiaoxian walked to Sai and Jean, who were lying on the ground. He weighed the stick in his hand and rubbed his fist, which was stained with Sai's blood, on the stick. Then, he looked at the two in front of him and smiled. Seeing this smile, Sai and Jean felt a chill down their spines. They couldn't wait to run away, as if something terrible was going to happen. However, Sai was lying on the ground and couldn't stand up at all, while Jean, who was sitting on the ground, quickly kicked his feet and tried to retreat. Xiaoxian bent down, holding the stick and waving it towards Sai and Jean. His movement was sudden and neat. At that moment, Sai and Jean felt that they had stopped breathing. They felt cold all over, and there was only the stick in their eyes. Crack! The stick hit the space between Sai and Jean and broke instantly. The front part of the stick was broken, and the broken pieces of wood splashed on Sai and John's faces, leaving some bloodstains. Xiao Xian moved closer to the two who were stunned. "These things are mine. You can go after I pick them up. Understand?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a strange sense of oppression. It gave Sai and John the feeling that if they didn't show weakness now, they would be hit by the stick just now. Sai didn't say anything, but still stared at Xiao Xian angrily. Beside him, Jean was trembling all over. He nodded quickly to show that he completely understood, with caution and fear in his eyes. "No wonder my parents didn't allow me to get close to the kids in the orphan cave. The kids from the orphan cave were really scary, even scarier than Sai, who often beat people up." Jean thought to himself. Xiao Xian didn't continue to waste time on them. Since Sai and Jean could come, the others might come too. Xiao Xian could only defeat the three kids by tricks, and that was with the help of Caesar. If more people came or older kids came, Xiao Xian would have to retreat. Thinking of this, Xiao Xian sped up his picking. Chapter 6. Sai, who was lying on the side, wiped his face. He didn't care about his swollen face and the blood coming out of his nose. Instead, he looked at Xiao Xian with hatred. He couldn't see clearly what Xiao Xian had picked up from the ground, but he was sure that they were good stones, which could at least be exchanged for food for a few days. Xiao Xian could feel Sai and John's gaze, but he was used to it. After picking up some things, he looked at the sky. It was past noon, and it was time to go back. Today's harvest was enough. Although there were some good stones here, Xiao Xian was too weak to pick up too many. It might not be a good thing for him to keep them. His strength was not enough now, but in the future, when the so-called totemic power was awakened, Xiao Xian called Caesar back and made sure that the kid named Yi, who was dragged away by Caesar, was still safe. Then he left with the stones wrapped in animal skin. When Yi, who was dragged away by Caesar, staggered back, he saw Sai lying on the ground with blood on his face, and John huddled beside him. Sai, who had recovered his breath, ordered Yi and John to hurry up and see if they could find any good stones to exchange for food. At the same time, they were cursing and shouting that they would beat Yi up next time, and that they would rob Xiao Xian of his things. What they didn't know was that not far from them, there were warriors who had witnessed what had just happened. However, after Xiao Xian left, those warriors also left one after another. "Who was that kid?" a young warrior asked the person next to him curiously. "You mean the one with the wolf? I think his name is Xian, from the cave at the foot of the mountain. As for the wolf, it belongs to the shaman. Don't even think about it," the older warrior warned. He didn't know why the shaman did that, but he didn't want to know. He only knew that he couldn't rob the shaman of his things. As for the kid Xian, in his opinion, he was just helping the shaman raise the wolf. The young warrior scratched his messy hair, which was full of stone chips, and said, "How could I steal from the shaman? I just think that kid is interesting. When he awakens his power, I'm sure he won't be too bad. We can recruit him into our hunting group." "It's still too early to say that. We'll have to wait for another 2 or 3 years. I think the kids on your side of the mountain are not bad. As for the kids from the caves..." The older warrior shook his head. He didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he meant. The distribution of the tribe was roughly divided into 3 levels. Basically, the stronger the warrior, the higher the level, closer to the top of the mountain. The mountaintop was also the center of the entire tribe. It was said that the tribe's fire pit was at the top of the mountain, the coldest part of the mountain. In the eyes of many warriors, the kids from the other side of the cave awakened their totemic powers later than the kids who lived at the foot of the mountain, and their talents were worse. Even if those kids were old enough to awaken their totemic powers and could go out to hunt, they would not let those kids join their own hunting teams. Teamwork was the most important thing in a hunting team. Any weak part of a team could bring unexpected and tragic consequences. On his way back, Xiao Xian didn't know what those warriors were talking about, nor did he know what those warriors thought of him. But he had already guessed that there were people around. He had heard a lot of things, so he guessed something. Although the warriors in the mountain didn't pay attention to the surroundings during training, they were still very sensitive to the movements around them when they were resting. The noise here would definitely attract some warriors. When Jean shouted for help in the wild, there were probably several warriors around. It was just that those warriors wouldn't easily make a move. And Xiao Xian also knew that as long as it wasn't too serious, those warriors would just watch, and wouldn't interfere. Just like just now, when Xiao Xian smashed the wooden stick on the ground, judging from the strength, if it hit any vital parts, Sai and Zhang's lives would be in danger. Those warriors would definitely make a move, and Xiao Xian would leave a bad impression in their minds, which would be detrimental to Xiao Xian's future survival in the tribe. Therefore, that strike was just a warning and deterrence from Xiao Xian to Sai and Zhang. Xiao Xian returned with a full load. When the patrolling warriors and the guards in charge of guarding the edge of the residential area saw Xiao Xian's bulging animal skin bag, they just asked a few questions. They didn't rob Xiao Xian's gains today, because they didn't care about Xiao Xian's things. Returning to the gravel ground where he practiced martial arts in the morning, Xiao Xian picked up 2 stones from the stones he picked up today, and then buried the rest. He didn't have time to deal with these stones now, and it was even more impossible to bring them back to the cave. There were a group of wolf cubs in the cave, who would snatch and bite anything they saw. Therefore, Xiao Xian never hid food in the cave, nor did he exchange it for food. After hiding it well, Xiao Xian sat on the ground to rest. Climbing the mountain and beating people had consumed a lot of energy. Xiao Xian looked at the rolling mountains in the distance, and then turned back to look at the residential area of the tribe. He looked at the houses at the foot of the mountain, which was the lowest level of the tribe. He lowered his head and looked at his fist, which was still stained with dried blood. It had only been half a year, and he had already become a barbarian like the Aborigines. The pressure of survival really accelerated this kind of assimilation. What was it like in the civilized era? Xiao Xian dreamed about it a few times at night, but those images were getting more and more blurry. It was clearly less than a year ago. Although this place was a little better than the uncivilized primitive barbarians that Xueqi had mentioned, it wasn't much better. In the past, even if he saw parents beating their children, Xiao Xian would go up and mediate. When the adults beat their children seriously, Xiao Xian would even fight with them. He wouldn't hurt the children, but now? Of course, the environment was different, and the children in the tribe were not the same as those he had met in his previous life. Even if they were of the same age, their personalities were poles apart. Take the children in the children's cave for example. Even if they were scared this time, next time when it came to food, they would still decisively come up and fight for it. Moreover, each of them would be more ruthless than the last. When their emotions were stirred up, they would not be as restrained as Xiao Xian. They would throw stones or swing wooden sticks. If you couldn't beat them, you would suffer a big loss. For example, although Zhang was trembling like that just now, and looked very scared, next time, he would still swing his stick or throw stones at Xiao Xian, and follow Sai and the others to fight for Xiao Xian's things. God knew that when Xiao Xian woke up in the cave for the first time, it was time for the cave to distribute food. Facing the wolf-like gazes around him, Xiao Xian thought that he had fallen into a wolf's den. They were all children, and the oldest was only 13 years old. Most of them were 6 or 7 years old. Savagery was contagious. After a good rest, Xiao Xian took 2 stones of good quality to a stoneware craftsman and exchanged them for 4 palm-sized jerky. 2 of them were boneless, and the other 2 were boneless. The boneless jerky was all given to Caesar, and Xiao Xian ate the boneless jerky himself. The remaining jerky was exchanged for a small piece of cheap animal skin. Winter was coming, and he had to prepare more things in advance. When he returned to the children's cave, it was time for the tribe to distribute food every day. The people in charge of transporting food had already prepared today's food, and put it in a big stone vat. Only the warriors who had awakened their totemic power could move such a big vat. The tribe would be responsible for the food in the children's cave until the children in the cave awakened their totemic power. After that, they would leave the cave and build their own houses. Meat was also part of the food provided on a daily basis, but not much. It was barely enough to sustain the basic life of the children in the cave. After all, it was not easy to hunt for meat. In addition to meat, most of the time there were plants such as the red hairy fruit that Xiao Xian saw now. It was a kind of arbor tuber, brown-red in color. There were many thin roots on the outside of the tuber, which looked like fluff. The big ones were similar to the pumpkins that Xiao Xian had seen in his last life, and the small ones were the size of an adult's fist. This fruit tasted like potatoes, and was easy to fill up. The only thing that troubled Xiao Xian was the after-effect of this fruit. In terms of efficacy, the red hairy fruit had the effect of adjusting the gastrointestinal function and dredging the intestinal qi. To put it bluntly, this fruit was good for ventilation. Also, the red hairy fruit had a special feature. If you ate only these red hairy fruits and did not eat any meat, the ventilation effect would be especially obvious. But if you ate some meat, the reaction would not be so strong. Most of the kids in the orphan cave only ate and slept. Their daily food sources were all distributed by the tribe. Only a few of them would go out to find ways to get extra food. That was why the air quality in the orphan cave plummeted every time they ate the red hairy fruit. That was the ecstasy. Xian's face turned green. Hey Xian! Ku, who was in charge of distributing food, trotted over when he saw Xian. He handed a piece of cooked red hairy fruit to Xian. It was quite big, obviously bigger than the ones given to the other children in the cave. Ku was one of the oldest children in the cave, 13 years old. Besides him, there were 2 other children who had reached the age of 13, but they were not as strong as Ku. Therefore, Ku had been appointed to be in charge of the cave, helping to distribute food every day. The advantage was that he could get more food, so he grew stronger, unlike the other children living in the cave. However, Ku didn't talk much with the other children in the cave. He was always outside during the day, and only came back when it was time to eat. He didn't talk much with Xian either. Now he came over with a big piece of food. Why? Xian looked at Ku, and took the red hairy fruit. Ku was in a good mood, and even a little excited. Xian, I'm going to the mountainside tomorrow, and I'll stay there for the whole winter. I'll leave the cave to you, said Ku. Xian almost threw the red hairy fruit in his hand when he heard this. Ku didn't care about the things in the cave. He should let the older children take over. There were 2 13-year-olds, and several 12 and 11-year-olds. Why did he choose him, who was less than 10 years old? Ku didn't have the final say on who should be in charge, so Xian asked, who said so? Ku pointed at the man who was in charge of transporting food every day. He was leaning against the stone vat, swinging his toes and picking his teeth casually. Looking at the children who were fiercely fighting for food, Xian really wanted to grab the man and ask, "Delivery man, are you fucking kidding me?" Chapter 7. There were 27 kids living in the cave, including Xian. All of them were ferocious. How could Xian take care of them with his small arms and legs? Many kids in the cave wanted to take over Ku's position. In order to get more food, Xian, who was obviously much smaller than Ku, would be dissatisfied by the other kids, and the dissatisfaction would inevitably lead to fights. One word. Troublesome. The middle-aged man who was responsible for delivering food to the cave was called Gu. He was not as strong as Mai, and he had lost an arm in a hunting mission. Now he could not go out hunting, so he retired from the hunting team and was responsible for delivering food every day. Xian went to ask him why, but he did not get any information. After the food was distributed, Gu left with an empty stone vat in one hand. Even though he had lost an arm, he was still strong enough to carry the stone vat with one hand. After Gu left, Ku went into the cave to announce the new decision and the person who would take over his job. From tomorrow onwards, Xian will be in charge of distributing food. After the meal, the atmosphere in the orphan cave had calmed down. But because of Ku's words, the atmosphere became tense again. The kids in the orphan cave didn't know how to complain. They didn't know how to reason, but they didn't look good. Ku did not stay any longer, nor did he explain. He quickly packed his things and left. He was old, and if there were no accidents, he would awaken his totemic power after this winter. That was to say, if he left now, he might not come back to the cave again. Ku left in a relaxed mood, but Xian's heart was heavy. He looked at the sky, and compared it to the time in his previous life. It was about 3:00 in the afternoon. There was still some time before the sun went down. Xian held Caesar's hand and went to the gravel field again. He sat on the ground, thinking about what to do next. He had planned to live a peaceful life, and wait for 2 or 3 years until his totemic power was awakened. Even if he was not talented enough and awakened late, he would awaken his totemic power naturally at Ku's age. At that time, he would go out and build his own house, join a hunting team, and go hunting. Now, it seemed that this peaceful life was no longer possible. When he left the cave, several children stared at him and Caesar with ill intentions. "Do you think they'll wake up in the middle of the night and eat you?" Xian asked as he watched Caesar pacing back and forth on the gravel. In the past, the Ku was around, so those little bastards didn't really do anything. But once the Ku was gone, the situation was hard to predict. The kids in the orphan cave were more ruthless than the other kids in the tribe. They didn't think too much. If they were really hungry, They wouldn't care about the patterned plate given by the shaman. What if they joined forces and roasted the Caesar? Xian alone was no match for the 20 or so people in the cave. Caesar didn't realize the predicament he was in. He couldn't find any stone worms on the gravel, so he started to think about going to the Black Swamp. There were 2 forbidden areas near the mountain where the tribe was located. One was a large black swamp, where it was easy to get trapped. Basically, once you got trapped, you would die. The other one was a big river in front of the mountain. You couldn't see the other side of the river. There were many river beasts in the river. It was said that in the early days, several powerful warriors in the tribe went into the river to fish, but they never came back. There were too many unknown dangers, so in the end, the leaders of the tribe decided not to let people go into the water. Therefore, except for the women in the tribe who occasionally went to the shallow beach to wash their animal skins, no one dared to touch the river. There was a small stream flowing down from the top of the mountain, where the tribe used to drink water. Naturally, no one wanted to touch the river, which was full of unknown dangers. No matter if it was the Black Swamp or the riverbank, there were warriors on duty to prevent people in the tribe from entering the 2 dangerous areas. They were also on guard against unpredictable dangers. Without fishing, domestication, and planting, the tribe could only rely on hunting. This was also the main reason why food was always in short supply in the tribe. Food was the most important thing in everything. Caesar was such a big piece of meat walking around in front of the hungry children every night, which made the little ones in the cave drool. What should I do? Xian sighed again. He couldn't help but complain about the old faker who gave him the plate but didn't show up again. The tribe didn't allow people to enter the Black Swamp or go into the river, especially the children who hadn't awakened their totemic power. However, they didn't say that wolves were not allowed to get close to the Black Swamp. Therefore, when he came here occasionally, Caesar would go to the edge of the Black Swamp to find something to grind his teeth, such as some weird beetles that lived in the Black Swamp. After a few times, the warriors in charge of guarding the border turned a blind eye. Animals were very sensitive to danger. Of course, Caesar also knew that the Black Swamp was very dangerous, so he only wandered around the border. No one knew what Caesar had found, but he ran over with something in his mouth. He loosened his mouth and threw a black lump in front of Xian. The thing that Caesar brought over was a bug that Xian had never seen before. Different from the beetles last time, this one was softer. It was as big as Xian's palm, flat and oval in shape. It had many slender legs, and its whole body was as black as the Black Swamp. When Caesar held it in his mouth, it even used its legs to prick Caesar's nose. Caesar also brought back bugs several times before, probably for fun. After all, there weren't many creatures in the tribe that could interest Caesar, let alone catching rabbits. As a wolf, it was quite pitiful to have to deal with bugs all the time. When Caesar tried to bring back the escaping bug, Xian found that the bug spat out a lot of black bubbles from its mouth and wrapped it up. Caesar didn't like these black bubbles very much, so he loosened his mouth and threw the bug away. The black bubbles gathered together and finally became as big as a football, wrapping the bug in the middle. Caesar circled around the ball made of black bubbles, but didn't bite it. Obviously, he hated the black bubbles, probably because they tasted bad. About a quarter of an hour later, Caesar gave up on the bug hiding in the black ball and turned back to the gravel field to continue looking for stone bugs. Xian, on the other hand, was interested in the insect. He took out his stone knife and poked at the ball. He found that the originally soft black bubble had now become hard and brittle. Under Xian's forceful poke, the black football split into 2 halves, and the insect hiding inside ran out in panic, fleeing in the direction of the Black Swamp. The whole insect seemed to have shrunk by more than half compared to before, and it was shriveled. Xian didn't chase after the bug. He squatted down and carefully looked at the ball that had split in half. Using his stone knife, Xian found that the 2 black balls were very light and didn't feel much weight. He had to use a little strength to crush them. Xian studied one ball and crushed it, then looked at the other black ball. After thinking for a while, he called Caesar back and took the black ball to the river. Even if the people in the tribe came to the river, they would only move cautiously in the shallows, where it was considered safe. Xian naturally wouldn't go into the water to court death. Who knew what strange creatures were in the water? He just wanted to see if the ball was really as he thought. Xian untied the straw rope tied around his waist, tied one end to the black ball, and held the other end by himself. Then he threw the black ball into the water. Sure enough, just as Xian thought, the black ball floated on the water surface. This thing could be used to fish. They couldn't even remember the names after listening to the book. In the end, it stopped listing out the names. Now, he didn't need to list them one by one. The author's platform also had a record of all the rewards. Xueqi, I would like to say, thank you for your support. It had been more than 4 months since the release of the book. Many factors caused the delay in releasing the book. During this time, many people asked about the new book, and there were always people voting for it. I'm very grateful for everyone's support for Xueqi. Although it's a little late, I still want to say, Xueqi, am back. Chapter 8. Xian used the Black Hemisphere as a fishing float. Xian had tried using wooden blocks before, but it didn't work. Just like what the people in the tribe said, it worked in the diving area near the shore, but in the deeper areas, the wooden blocks would sink after being placed on the water surface for a while. Something would pull them down. Since this kind of black block was the swamp worm's life-saving method, it should also have a certain repelling effect on the creatures in the river that like to catch floating things. Without a fishing hook, and temporarily unable to find a stone hook to replace the hook, Xian had no choice but to directly tie a stone worm. It would be great if there were carnivorous fish in the water that were interested in stone worms. In his previous life, he used earthworms to fish, but in this life, he didn't see any earthworms, so he tried to use a stone worm instead. The people in the tribe said that the creatures in the water were very fierce, so they shouldn't care about such a simple bait. Without a hook, Xian didn't plan to catch a fish now. If the fish in the water ate stone worms, Xian could make a special hook tomorrow. The stone worm was just dug up by Caesar and tied to the end of the straw rope, but this was only temporary. If the stone worm was resistant to water, it would still slip away from the straw rope after a long time. Without enough tools, he could only try like this. If this stone worm slipped away, he could just dig up another one. The Black Hemisphere used as a fishing float was tied about half a meter away from the end of the rope. Xian didn't plan to explore the deep waters. Standing by the shoal, Xian threw out the bait and the Black Hemisphere. Bearing the weight of the straw rope and the stone worm, although the Black Hemisphere sank a little, it still floated steadily on the water surface. Xian looked at it and judged what might happen under the water. The straw rope on his body wasn't long, less than 5 meters in total. Xian was still very close to the place where he threw the stone worm. Standing on the shore, Xian's feet didn't touch the water. He paid attention to the water surface, in case of any accidents, so he could escape in time. There were guards not far away. If there was any danger, he would run towards them first. While Xian was doing all this, the 2 warriors who were in charge of guarding the riverbank were also very curious about Xian's purpose. They originally thought that the kid was going to enter the water, so they planned to throw the kid back into the cave, but they didn't expect to see such a series of strange actions. Therefore, after the 2 of them looked at each other, they didn't go over for the time being. Instead, they stared at Xian. Caesar, when I tell you to pull, you pull the rope. Xian placed the other end of the rope in Caesar's mouth while he held the middle part. After waiting for a while, there was still no movement in the water. Xian thought to himself, are there no fish in the water near the shoal? Or was the thing in the water not interested in the stone worms? Before he could finish his sentence, the Black Hemisphere that was attached to the surface of the water abruptly sank. Got it! The rope in Xian's hand slid rapidly. His palm was burning from the friction of the straw rope. Xian held the rope tightly and pulled back. At the same time, he called Caesar, who was standing behind him, to help. Caesar, pull! Although it was a little sudden, Xian could feel that the force of the pull wasn't beyond what he could bear, so he asked Caesar to help him pull. He wanted to see what in the water had bitten the bait. Caesar bit the straw rope tightly and pulled back with all his strength. After dragging so many people, it wasn't like he had never pulled a rope before. The 2 warriors standing not far away became nervous. They had never been in the water before. Even if they came to the riverbank, they would only wash their animal skins in the water. They wouldn't take a step into the water. During the summer, they had seen huge river beasts appear on the surface of the water in the distance. In addition, there were bloody stories about this river passed down from generation to generation in the tribe. Therefore, they had always been cautious and fearful of this river. Now that they suddenly saw Xian pulling something out of the river, they were very surprised. Their nerves suddenly tightened. They were afraid that something big would come out of the water. Should we go over? One of the warriors nudged his companion with his elbow. Let's go over and see. The other hesitated for a moment. No one knew what he was thinking. The wind blew from the river to the shore. It was humid and there was a faint fishy smell. They didn't know whether it was the smell of the creatures in the water or something else, but this smell made the two warriors even more nervous. Xueqi could feel the creature in the water pulling through the straw rope in his hand. One side wanted to drag the bait into the water, while the other side wanted to pull the bait onto the shore. However, Xueqi was a little better. He stepped back step by step and pulled the thing out of the water. The creature that had bitten the bait was almost out of the water. The surface of the shallow water was splashing because of the fierce struggle of the creature in the water. Xueqi held the rope tightly and stared at the surface of the water as he pulled back. Suddenly, a picture flashed in front of his eyes. It was like a big mouth with countless fine teeth was biting towards him. The whole mouth almost covered Xueqi's head. Just as it was about to touch Xueqi, the picture quickly disappeared. The picture flashed too quickly. Xueqi didn't have time to dodge before it disappeared. Xueqi shook his head. He was probably too nervous and hallucinating. By the time the two warriors reached Xueqi's side, the creature in the water had revealed its full appearance. It was a very strange-looking fish. It was about 1/2 meter long, and its head took up 2/3 of its body. After being pulled out of the water, the fish's mouth was still tightly biting the rope that tied the stone worm. It didn't have any intention of letting go. Seeing that the warriors who had rushed over were stunned and didn't seem to want to help, Xueqi called out to Caesar. "Keep pulling, don't stop." This was the first time Caesar was pulling a fish. Other than being surprised and alert at the sight of the unknown creature, he quickly bit the straw rope and pulled back with all his strength. After pulling the fish out of the water and a little further back to make sure it wouldn't jump back into the water, Xueqi let go. "It's finally out. Good on you, Kai." "Caesar, let go. Where the fuck are you dragging the fish to?" Caesar was still pulling back with his butt in the air. As he pulled, he let out a low growl. Obviously, the fish that had been pulled out of the water had alerted him and made him want to fight. He was so engrossed in pulling that he continued even after Xueqi let go. When he heard Xueqi's words, Caesar reluctantly let go. He carefully approached the fish that was still flapping its tail. He bared his teeth as if he wanted to take a bite out of it. It was only a few steps from where Xueqi had first stood to where he had thrown the stone worm. The place where he had thrown the bait was supposed to be less than a person's depth. He didn't expect there to be such a ferocious fish in shallow water. Look at its big mouth, full of fine teeth, and it wouldn't let go of the bait. After it was pulled out of the water, it still flapped its tail vigorously and struggled violently. It looked like it wouldn't give up until it tore off the bait. One of the warriors who had come over used a spear that was either made of stone or had a spearhead to pierce through the fish. He used a lot of strength and the spear was very fast. The spear directly pierced through the fish's body and nailed it to the ground on the shore. The pierced fish finally let go of the rope. Its mouth opened and closed forcefully. The fish swayed its head as if it wanted to take a bite out of everything around it. As for the straw rope that had been loosened by the fish, only a piece of the stone worm that had been tied to it was left. The straw rope was almost bitten off. The straw rope used by Xueqi was very tough and wear-resistant. He had woven it himself and often used it to tie things up. It had been used for a long time without breaking, so it was very durable. He didn't expect that the straw rope would be bitten off in such a short time. Xueqi's eyes fell on the strange fish's open mouth, and he was startled. The most obvious part of the fish's head was its big mouth. In the mouth of the strange fish, countless fine sharp teeth could be seen. With such a proportion in teeth, it seemed that the fish was born to bite and kill. If it hadn't been for Caesar's help, Xueqi wouldn't have been able to pull it out of the water so quickly. If the nearby diving areas were full of fish like this, people would have been bitten off as soon as they entered the water. This was only one of the fish species. There might be more terrible things in the water. No wonder even the totem warriors in the tribe didn't want to go into the water. Xueqi shuddered at the thought of what would happen to the children in the tribe if they went into the water. Moreover, when he was pulling the rope, the scene that flashed in front of his eyes seemed to be this fish's mouth full of fine sharp teeth. Xueqi stared at the fish's mouth. He thought of the illusion he saw in front of the stone wall in the remote mountain village at the end of his previous life. The two warriors next to him saw Xueqi staring at the fish's mouth in a daze. They thought that Xueqi was scared and didn't dare to get close to this ferocious-looking creature. It was the first time for Xueqi to see this kind of fish, but one of the two warriors had seen it before. Before I awakened my totem power, I followed my father to the river. I saw this kind of prey once. The shaman said it was called a fish. There are dangers everywhere in the water. At that time, a woman washing animal skins by the river had her arm bitten off. My father stabbed one to death with a spear. Saying this, the warrior glanced at Xueqi. He didn't expect that Xueqi would be able to pull the fish out of the water without going into the water. That year, his father risked his own life to go into the water and save the woman who was dragged into the water. Unfortunately, half of her arm was gone when he rescued her. After that, the women in the tribe didn't come to the river to wash animal skins anymore. They had no choice but to come to the river to get water when the river narrowed during drought. When Xueqi came back to his senses, the fish was already dead. The warrior who stabbed the fish pulled out the spear and took the fish from the spearhead. He held the fish's tail and handed it to Xueqi. Here you go, this is your prey. Good job. You will become an excellent warrior in the future. After thinking for a while, the warrior said, You'd better stay away from the water. Other than the fish, there are many dangerous things in the river. You won't be so lucky every time. However, half an hour later, Xueqi, who was thought to be not so lucky every time, used the same method to pull out a bigger fish from the water. The two warriors were speechless. Chapter 9. The second fish that Xueqi dragged ashore was slightly bigger than the previous one, so he didn't ask the warrior to help him stab it to death. Instead, Xueqi knocked the fish unconscious with a stone. Even if it was only unconscious, it wouldn't live long out of the water. After tying the fish with a rope and hanging it on a tree, Xueqi took out the smaller fish that he had dragged ashore and found a few dry branches. Looking around, Xueqi found that the two warriors who were responsible for guarding the riverbank were looking at him curiously, so he raised his hand and waved at them. The two warriors who returned to the guard post hesitated for a moment, but they couldn't suppress their curiosity and walked over. Xian, what are you doing? Do you want to eat it? Do you need my help? The warrior who had stabbed the fish before asked Xueqi's name. They were both afraid and curious about the fish, but now that the fish was dead, their fear was gone, leaving only the curiosity of a hunter for a new prey. Let me do it. Weren't you in charge of killing it? The other warrior pushed the former away, took out a stone knife, and grabbed the fish. He cut open its stomach and discussed with his companion. Ha! Is this the intestine? How can it be so short? Where's its stomach? Is it this? No, it's this. This must be the stomach. Be careful. What's this? Don't break it. I don't know if there's a poison sac. Where's the heart? Move the knife forward a little bit. Hey, can you do it? The fish has lost so much blood. It's not stable. If you can't do it, I'll do it. The two warriors were discussing enthusiastically. Xueqi, who was standing next to them, was twitching his face. Were they hunting warriors? Was he actually a freakish forensic doctor? They were two extremely curious anatomical enthusiasts. No matter how bad Xueqi's impression of the two warriors was, he had to admit that they were really good at dissection. Even if it was the first time they touched the fish, they could quickly solve it. While dissecting the fish, they also told Xueqi about the things they needed to pay attention to when hunting in the forest. For example, which animals had poisonous organs, which ones had poison sacs, which ones tasted better, and so on. For the sake of safety, they never ate the organs of unfamiliar creatures. Soon, the only thing left was a fish with its organs dug out, its head cut open several times, and its gills dug out. There's not a lot of parts that can be eaten, but the size is okay, the warrior with the stone knife said as he wiped the blood on the knife. Instead of washing it in the river, the two warriors just wiped the blood on the fish with leaves, and then wrapped the organs with leaves. They dug a hole next to a tree and buried it. The smell of blood might attract other creatures. It was fine in the tribe, but on the riverbank, other than flying creatures, there might be creatures in the water that were sensitive to the smell of blood. They had to be careful. They also reminded Xueqi to do the same in the future if he encountered something similar. The tools used in the tribe to make fire were not as primitive as Xueqi had imagined. They used a kind of powder. Every warrior carried that powder with them. When they wanted to make a fire, they would take out a spoon-shaped stone tool and a stone pestle. They would put a little powder into the spoon-shaped tool and grind it quickly with the stone pestle. Soon, the powder would burn, and the spoon-shaped tool would become a small torch to light the hay and branches. The first time Xiao saw Gu, who was in charge of transporting food, lighting a fire, he was very surprised. Originally, he thought that a tribe like this would use wood drilling or flint, but he didn't expect that they had such a convenient and fast tool. The children living in the cave did not have such a fire starter. They had to wait until they became warriors and left the tribe. Sometimes when he looked at this tribe, Xiao felt a strange contradiction, as if the technology they had mastered was not in line with the development of the tribe. Although he was confused, Xiao did not think too much about it. After roasting the fish, one of the warriors tasted a little. After making sure it was okay and tasted good, the 3 men and 1 wolf shared the fish. The food was not enough for the 2 warriors, and Caesar was not keen on cooked food, so he lost interest after eating a little. Only Xiao was satisfied with the food. After eating the fish, the 2 warriors asked for the fish bones, saying that they wanted to keep it as a souvenir. Xiao thought they wanted to bring it back to show off to their hunting team members. After that, the 2 warriors continued to stand guard, while Xiao took Caesar back to the cave, dragging the dead fish tied with a rope. It was getting dark, and some of the children in the cave had fallen asleep. The ones who were awake were trying to sleep, or waiting for Xiao to come back. There was a bonfire in the cave. Gu, who was responsible for transporting food, would come to light a small bonfire in the evening, for the children in the cave to keep warm or roast food. In the past, Ku was responsible for putting out the bonfire before going to bed, but from now on, it would be Xiao's turn. Standing at the entrance of the cave, Xiao asked Caesar to wait outside, while he took a deep breath and strode into the cave. The older children who were still awake were thinking about something around the bonfire. When they saw Xiao coming in, their eyes followed him. Xiao could feel the hostility in their eyes. After all, Xiao had taken the position that they had been dreaming about for a long time. After Xiao entered the cave, he climbed onto a large millstone-shaped rock near the entrance, which was usually used by Ku to distribute food. Standing on the rock, he could see every corner of the cave. The older children all gathered around. Xiao glanced at them, clapped his hands and said, "Get up! Those who are awake, get up!" Except for those who were too deep asleep, the others in the cave gradually gathered around. Xiao saw them coming, so he looked at them and said, "I know you don't want me to take over Ku's position, so you want to kick me out and come up here by yourselves. Instead of sleeping, you are waiting for me here. But this is Uncle Ge's decision. If you have any complaints, grievances, or suggestions, don't talk to me. It's useless. If you have the guts, go talk to Uncle Gu." The children standing in front frowned, obviously considering the possibility of talking to Gu. Talk to Gu? Would Gu be angry? Would he stop giving out food if he got angry? Would they starve if there was no food? That didn't seem right. After all, they were older and thought more than the younger children. Xiao glanced at them and continued, "Have you ever thought about why I can take over Ku's position? I'm younger than you, not as tall as you, and not as strong as you. Why did Uncle Gu let me take over? Because I'm stronger than you, more capable than you." His words were sonorous and forceful, and his face didn't even change when he lied. Xiao didn't know what Gu, who was in charge of delivering food, was thinking. He still planned to talk to Gu tomorrow. But right now, what he needed to do was to get through this and give the little wolf cubs in the cave a good shock. Otherwise, he had to prevent them from ganging up on him. It wasn't that Xiao didn't want to use a gentler method, but these little brats were too difficult to deal with. Reasoning with them wouldn't work. According to Xiao's observation, once Gu decided on something, he wouldn't change his mind for a while. Therefore, since he let Xiao be in charge of this cave, it would definitely last for a while, maybe even longer. Xiao had to solve the problem from the beginning. He had to be strong. The people standing in front were angry when they heard Xiao's words. One of them was so angry that his eyebrows were almost raised. But before he could say anything, Xiao shouted, "Shut up!" After that, Xiao shouted outside the cave, "Caesar!" Caesar, who was waiting outside the cave, bit the straw rope and dragged the tied fish in. Everyone in the cave was looking at Caesar. It wasn't until Xiao went to get the fish that they noticed something else was being dragged into the cave. "This thing, I hunted it." Xiao untied the straw rope tied to the fish, revealing its true body. He lifted the fish by its tail to show the group of people. Many fish didn't have eyelids and couldn't blink. Even if they were dead, their eyes were still wide open. Under the dim light of the fire, the fish's red eyes looked strange and dark. Its mouth opened and closed as Xueqi waved his hand. The surrounding children could see the countless sharp teeth in the fish's mouth. After the dust was wiped off, the fish's scales reflected a cold light. All of these added a touch of coldness to the already cold night. The children who were the closest to Xueqi couldn't help but take a few steps back. Their eyes were full of vigilance. At the same time, their gazes towards Xueqi changed from provocation and hostility to caution. The tribe worshipped the strong. The strong warriors in the tribe were worshipped by the whole tribe. Most of the time, they liked to solve problems in simpler and more direct ways, such as violence. But in addition to fighting directly, they could also judge the difference in strength between two parties based on the prey they hunted. The better the prey they hunted, the stronger the opponent. But now, the children in the cave hadn't awakened their totemic power. They hadn't become totemic warriors, so they couldn't go out to hunt. They couldn't get any prey at all, unless they robbed it. Not to mention getting such a ferocious-looking prey. At first glance, they knew it wasn't easy to deal with. Look at those teeth, how much flesh would be shaved off by them. Can you hunt? Can you hunt such prey? Or can you get other things to eat? You. Or you. Which one of you can do it? The children who were pointed out by Xueqi shrank back and shook their heads. You can't. Since you can't, then suppress all your dissatisfaction and emotions. Of course. He had to appease her after saying those harsh words. Xueqi picked up the fish. This is my gift to everyone on my first day in office. After Xueqi finished speaking, the cave was quiet for a while. After a while, a child asked in a trembling voice, "What is the gift?" Another older child continued, "Can it be eaten?" Xueqi choked. Yes. His heart was tired. Whoosh! The atmosphere in the cave suddenly became lively. Whatever dissatisfaction, whatever cautiousness, whatever resentment, all of it was thrown out of the window. Eat, to them, was probably the most beautiful word in the world. Chapter 10. Now Xueqi was at most a small cave master, and the people in the cave were all kids who were not so peaceful. Xueqi removed the internal organs and gills of the fish he brought with him. There was a special place in the cave for throwing garbage, so Xueqi threw it there directly. There were all kinds of leftovers, and every few days, the tribe would send people to clean it up. Except for the parts that couldn't be chewed, the rest of the fish was eaten clean, leaving only a broken skeleton and a mouth full of sharp teeth. The kids in the cave all fell asleep after eating the fish. Xueqi left a torch to extinguish the fire, and then took the torch to the depths of the cave to have a look. Originally, he planned to trade for some food and animal skins before winter came. Now that he had taken over the cave and found a way to fish, he wondered if he should bring some people to catch more fish tomorrow. The more food they stored, the more food they would have in the winter. After all, the food provided by the tribe was not much. The people in the tribe were now stocking up food before winter. Every day, people could see people making jerky to preserve food. If he could get more fish, not only would the situation in the cave improve, but he could also trade the fish for warm furs from the people in the tribe. Xueqi did not want to be frozen in the winter. Walking in the cave with the torch, Xueqi looked around with the help of the dim light. The last time he came here, it was not long after he came to this world. He walked around on a whim, and after that, he did not look into the depths. As the saying goes, a new broom sweeps clean. This is my territory. I am the master. The fire had to be burned, and the territory had to be replanned. In the early days, when the tribe was still small and there were only a few people, they all lived here. The cave was decorated with places to store food, firewood, furs, tools and weapons, and there was even a toilet. But later, everyone went out to build houses, and the cave was used to raise the helpless children. Then it became messy, and many places were emptied. More than 20 children gathered near the entrance of the cave, so there was a lot of space left. There was also a vent in the depths of the cave, but because no one went in for a long time, it was blocked. Even during the day, it was still dark. After a rough look, Xueqi returned to the entrance of the cave, laid out the hay that was dry during the day, and extinguished the fire to go to sleep. But tonight, for some reason, he could not sleep. What happened in the cave, the fish in the river, and the illusion he saw during the day when he was fishing. As he thought about it, Xueqi felt a pair of eyes watching him, but he didn't know who it was. The fire was extinguished, and the cave was dark. The moonlight from outside shone in through the vent, bringing with it the dark blue of the night. The children in the cave were all asleep, and he could hear them snoring one after another. The entrance was the entrance was the entrance was the entrance of the cave was the entrance was the entrance of the cave. Caesar was sleeping quietly next to him. He didn't hear any strange noises, so there shouldn't be any danger. Was it that the head is staring at him? Shaking his head slightly, Xueqi wrapped himself in the animal skin coat, closed his eyes and planned to sleep. Tomorrow he would take these kids out to fish. However, not long after he closed his eyes, Xueqi seemed to see a black shadow flashing by. The shadow was so fast that Xueqi did not have time to see it clearly. Behind the shadow, there were pairs of eyes with a faint dark blue light. What was that? Xueqi was shocked, and suddenly opened his eyes. Everything was still the same as before. The cave was dark, and only the places where the moonlight shone in were a little dimly lit. Xueqi couldn't fall asleep at all. He turned over and saw the air vent on the wall above him. Usually, even at night, the vent would not be blocked, and there would be no trouble. After thinking for a while, Xueqi got up. Because the place where he slept was high, he could see the outside through the vent as long as he stood up. There was moonlight outside, but it was brighter inside the cave, and he could vaguely see the nearby scenery. Outside the cave, there was a stone pillar about 5 meters high. It was built here in the early years, and its function was similar to a sundial. The people who lived in the cave would judge the approximate time by the shadow of the stone pillar under the sun. Now that the people in the tribe had left, the children who lived in the cave would carve on the stone pillar when they went out. Because of the wind and the sun, the stone pillar was no longer what it used to be. The body of the pillar was full of bumps and hollows, and only maintained a rough shape. But now, there was a bird standing on the top of the stone pillar. Xueqi recognized that bird. When he first saw it, he thought it was a bat. Later, he learned that it was a bird that looked like a swallow. It flew very fast, and only moved at night. Moreover, it ate meat. The people in the tribe called it the night swallow, which was very similar to the nickname of bats that Xueqi knew. Unfortunately, it was much more ferocious than bats, and liked to live in groups. Sometimes it would move in a large group. Therefore, very few people in the tribe would go out at night. Even if they went out, they would light a torch, or they would be easily attacked by the night swallow. Ordinary people couldn't hear the cry of the night swallow, but the people in the tribe said that strong warriors could actually hear it. It was said that the night swallow's cry was very harsh, but most people had never heard it before. It was only passed down by word of mouth. Just when Xueqi looked at the stone pillar, the night swallow resting on the stone pillar also looked at him keenly. Under the moonlight, the night swallow's eyes reflected a dark blue light, which was exactly the same as the image that appeared in Xueqi's mind when he closed his eyes. The night swallow would not come in through the ventilation of the cave. It liked to stand in the distance and watch. Then, it would find a target that was alone and attack it together. In the past 6 months, Xueqi had never seen a night swallow enter the cave. But if anyone went out at night without a torch, they would definitely be attacked. Gently exhaling, Xueqi no longer looked outside. He laid down and planned to go back to sleep. Now that he knew what the black shadow and dark blue eyes were, Xueqi was not able to fall asleep immediately. Xueqi felt that he seemed to be able to see dangerous creatures nearby, such as the fish during the day and the birds standing outside now. The next morning, the weather was clear and Yangguang was shining brightly. As usual, Xueqi got up and tied up the hay mattress. He would take it out to dry later. Clapping his hands, Xueqi said to the people lying in the cave, "Are you awake? How many of you are awake? Get up and follow me to fish." There was no response. "You can eat the fish you caught yesterday," Xueqi continued. There was a slight movement, but it was not loud. Some of the children were still in deep sleep, unable to be woken up by the thunder. Even if some of them woke up, they would still hesitate when they heard Xueqi's words. After all, it was a habit that had been formed for a long time, and they would not change just because of Xueqi's words. They were used to sleeping at this time of the day and waiting for food to be distributed in the afternoon. There were also some who opened their eyes but did not wake up. They yawned and went back to sleep. In the end, only 4 of the 20 children followed Xueqi out. The 2 oldest children in the cave were among them. Of the remaining 2, One was called Tuesday. He was very timid, which was a waste of such a domineering name. The other was called Ba. This child was a little stutterer. He was relatively simple and honest, except when he fought for food. These two children were both 11 years old, but their physiques were obviously different. Ba was a head taller than Tuesday. He looked about the same as the two oldest children in the cave who were 13 years old. Tu was very thin and small, about the same as Xian. Xian asked Caesar to dig up some stone worms. He still used yesterday's straw rope and the black hemisphere that could float on the water. Then he took the 4 children to the riverbank. Today, the 2 warriors were in charge of guarding the cave. They didn't go back last night. They had to guard the cave for 3 consecutive nights before they could be replaced. When they saw Xian, they even smiled and greeted him, exchanging a few words. The other 4 children in the cave were very surprised. They had never encountered such a situation in the tribe. Because of last night's incident, the 2 older children's desire to compete with Xian had lessened a little. Seeing the current situation, their desire to compete with Xian became even weaker. In their opinion, those who got along well with the warriors in the tribe would always get a lot of benefits. When they were in trouble, someone would help them. Ku, for example, was often envied by others because he knew some people on the mountainside. Xian prepared everything and told the 4 of them what they were going to do later. That's it. It's very simple. Follow me and do what I say. When we catch the fish, we will share it. As expected, the 4 children's eyes lit up when they heard the word eat. The worries they had when they saw the river dissipated. The length of the straw rope was limited. This time, Xian didn't plan to throw the bait too far. He also didn't ask Caesar to help. The 4 children took Caesar's place from yesterday, while Caesar quietly squatted next to them. The 4 children held the straw rope in their hands. They were very nervous. Besides the nervousness of encountering creatures in the river for the first time, they were also very excited about catching fish for the first time. Okay, don't move now. Wait for my command. Xian stared at the water and said after throwing the bait. Soon, there was some movement in the water. This was the 3rd time they caught fish. Xian had experience and immediately shouted, "Pull!" Hearing Xian's words, the 4 children held the straw rope tightly and pulled with all their strength. After all, the 4 children together were stronger than Caesar. This time, they pulled the fish quite smoothly. The fish that was pulled up was similar to the one that Xian caught for the first time yesterday. It was the first time the 4 children had seen a living fish, and a very lethal one at that. After Xian asked them to let go, they immediately picked up the wooden sticks beside them and smashed the fish with all their strength. Especially Tu, who was timid but still moved forward. He waved the wooden stick to hit the fish's head while screaming in fear. Xian wanted to beat him up. Okay, stop. Xian stopped them and pulled away the 4 children who were waving the sticks around the fish. Xian had told them at the beginning about the danger of this kind of fish. He told them to bring long tools and be careful when fishing. Now, the 4 children were on guard. Unfortunately, it was their first time fishing and hunting in their lives. They were too excited and all kinds of emotions mixed together. When they attacked the fish, they used all their strength. The 4 of them worked together. In just a short while, when Xian pulled them away and looked at the fish, it was a horrible sight. How could they eat it when it was beaten like this? The first fish was thrown aside. Xian ordered them to catch a second one. This time, they finally kept the fish intact. They killed the fish and dug out its internal organs. Then they went to the 2 warriors to borrow a fire and roasted the fish. The fish that Xian brought back to the cave last night looked big, but there were too many bones. The proportion of the fish that could be eaten was not big. Plus, there were more than 20 children in the cave, so there was very little food for each of them. But today was not the day. The half-meter-long fish was divided among 5 people. No matter how many bones there were, each of them could eat a lot. The 4 children were very excited, but they did not know how to express themselves. They had to focus on eating, so they could only laugh like crazy. It's delicious, Tu said. Yes, eating fish is good for the brain. Xian said. What is brain? One of the children asked. Xian thought for a while and explained simply. It means that you will grow better. If I grow better, does that mean that I can become stronger, bigger than before? Like totem warriors? Ba stuttered. Hearing Ba's words, the other 3 children also looked up at Xueqi. Their eyes were shining. Although the children in the cave were very fierce, they were not good at hiding their emotions. What they were thinking could be seen on their faces. At this moment, the 4 children looked at Xueqi's expression, as if urging Xueqi, tell us, tell us. As long as it is good, we will believe whatever you say. Therefore, Xueqi swallowed back the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He paused for a while and then said yes. Against his will. The river slowly washed the riverbank. The surface of the water looked calm, but just now Xueqi saw the image of the fish's mouth full of sharp teeth. It was much bigger than yesterday's, but the image was fainter, probably because the big fish was farther away. In the boundless Tamshui River, danger and opportunity coexisted. The rations for the winter were here. Xueqi thought to himself. It has been a week. Thank you for your tips and recommendation tickets. Today I even saw the Tangyuan reward. Thank you. Happy Lantern Festival. Friends who are working or studying outside and can't go home, remember to cook a bowl of hot white Tangyuan for yourself. Chapter 11. After they were full, the 5 of them caught 6 more fish. One was given to Caesar, which was not roasted. Caesar liked to eat raw food. As for the remaining 5, Xueqi gave one to each of them as trophies. When Xueqi brought the 4 back, Uncle Gu, who was in charge of transporting food, had already arrived. However, he did not see Xueqi, so he waited outside the cave. The children in the cave had already formed a biological clock. Every day, they would wake up naturally at this time of the day. They would be energized, waiting for the food to be divided so that they would have the strength to fight for it. However, Xueqi was not here, and Uncle Gu did not give them any food. They were hungry, so they became anxious as they waited. 2 of them even fought with each other because of a little friction, which made their noses bleed. Uncle Gu sat quietly on the edge of the stone vat filled with food. He did not care about their dispute, nor did he let the children get close to the stone vat. The 20 children surrounded the stone vat, not daring to get close. If they did, they would be kicked away by Uncle Gu, and there would be less food. They did not dare to do that. Sitting on the edge of the stone vat, Gu, who was looking at the sky and thinking about something, sensed the movement. He looked towards the distance and saw 5 children and a wolf walking over. The one leading them was the new cave master, Xueqi. However, when Uncle Gu saw what they were dragging, his eyes opened wide, and he almost fell off the stone vat in excitement. Before Xueqi and the others came closer, Uncle Gu could not help but jump off the stone vat and walk over. After 2 steps, he stepped back, picked up the stone vat, and walked over again. If only the stone vat was left here, the kids in the cave would definitely fight for it. This is fish? Uncle Gu pointed at the fish in Xueqi's hand and said. Many years ago, because of the accident by the river, Uncle Gu had seen this kind of creature in the water. However, he did not see it again because the chieftain did not allow them to go into the water. He did not expect to see it here today. How did you get it? If it was just luck, it was impossible to get so many. 1 fish was already rare enough. Could it be that something strange happened at the riverbank, and many dead fish came ashore? That could not be right. There were people guarding the riverbank. If there was anything strange, they would definitely warn them. Moreover, the fish that the children were dragging had traces of being hit with sticks. Hiss! When Gus saw the fish's mouth and fangs, he could not help but gasp. He was an experienced hunter. He could infer the attacking power and character of a creature based on its appearance. This was obviously a very lethal species. Even a strong totem warrior would not want to face such a creature. But he couldn't understand how these weak kids who hadn't awakened their totemic powers could catch fish. The 2 older kids beside Xueqi couldn't help but proudly tell Gu about their hunting operation this morning to show off their bravery. Showing off their abilities in front of the older warriors was good for them when they joined the hunting team in the future. It was also something that the kids in the tribe liked to do. The 2 children's narration was not clear, but Gu, who was experienced in hunting, was able to connect the dots based on their words. Gu looked at Xueqi with a complicated expression, and waved his hand. Let's distribute the food first. When the kids in the orphan cave saw the fish that Xueqi and the others were dragging, they wanted to surround them. On the other side, except for Xueqi, the other 4 immediately became alert. Even Ba, who was honest before, looked fierce. He hid the tied fish behind his back with one hand, and held the stick with the other hand. He would fight with anyone who came to snatch the fish. Caesar helped to look after Xiaoxian's fish. The kids in the tribe didn't dare to snatch it, so they could only stare at the other 4 kids. Fortunately, they were distracted by the food distribution. It was the first time that Xiaoxian was in charge of distributing food. He had seen how Ku did it, so he quickly got the hang of it. He even left some for the other 4 kids who were guarding the fish. Gu watched from the side as Xiaoxian finished distributing the food, and then looked at Xiaoxian's fish. He lifted the tank, looked at the fish again, took 2 steps, looked at it again, and finally left reluctantly. Like the other 2 warriors guarding the riverbank, Gu didn't do it for food. He was just curious about the fish. Unfortunately, Xiaoxian just wouldn't let him see the fish. Who asked this person to make him the cave master for no reason and not explain why? No one in the tribe gave these fish a name, so Xiaoxian directly called them piranhas. Xiaoxian had long noticed that there were some hanging devices above the cave. He didn't know how many years it had been unused. Xiaoxian tried using his own fish first. It could be hung up, and the stone trench above did not break. Seeing Xiaoxian doing this, the other 4 kids also asked him to help them hang the fish. They couldn't eat such a big fish all at once, and they didn't want to share it with others. They also had to guard against the other kids in the cave, so it was best to hang it up. The other end of the straw rope was tied to the wall. The 4 kids each guarded their own rope. They had to watch their own food to feel safe. Seeing that the 4 kids all had such big fish, the other kids in the cave started to regret not following them this morning. With a comparison, Xiaoxian also took this opportunity to instill a thought in these kids. Follow me, and there will be meat to eat. Want to follow me tomorrow? Okay, but you have to listen to me, Xiaoxian said. It wasn't easy to make the kids in the cave listen to him. It was useless to beat them up today, tomorrow, and the day after. Many kids in the tribe were not only resistant to beatings, but also stubborn. They were also very reckless. If you beat them down this time, they could still rob you next time. Even when the former cave master Ku was still around, not everyone was convinced. Many people had been beaten up by Ku, and Xiaoxian had seen it happen a few times. The beatings were quite severe, and they had to rest for more than 10 days before they could get up and walk. But now, Xiaoxian's words of "follow me, and there will be meat to eat" could smooth out their anger. The next day, Xiaoxian asked the kids to make straw ropes. In this season, there were many kinds of grass suitable for making straw ropes. The raw materials were easy to find, but not everyone knew how to make straw ropes. Many kids in the cave didn't know how to make straw ropes. Some of them had learned it from their parents, but they stopped making it after their parents passed away. There used to be 27 kids in the cave, but Ku, who used to be in charge of the cave, had left, and there was another quiet kid who was often absent. So now there were exactly 25 kids in the cave. They were divided into 5 groups, with 5 kids in each group. Among them, there were kids in each group who knew how to make straw ropes. Xiaoxian told them about the division of labor, who would be responsible for pulling the grass, who would be responsible for weaving, and who would get the stoneworms. However, these kids didn't seem to like cooperation. They always fought with each other in the same group, and they could even fight over a straw. Xiaoxian went over to calm them down. He thought for a while, and changed his words. Now each of your groups is a hunting team. This is your own hunting team. Hunting team. Hearing the words hunting team, the 20 kids were all lost in their thoughts. In the hearts of the kids in the tribe, hunting team was a very bright and high-end term. Only warriors who had awakened their totemic power could join. Joining a hunting team meant having a lot of food. They didn't expect that they could join a hunting team now, and start hunting right away. Just thinking about it made them excited. Xiaoxian looked at these kids, and said, "Okay, now those who don't want to join us, those who don't want to listen to my orders, and those who like to fight, step out." No one moved. The kid who stood in the front looked around, and felt that he was too conspicuous, so he quickly stepped back. He was afraid that he would be misunderstood as quitting. The kid who had just beaten the kid in his group was now very serious. He stood there obediently, and didn't feel that he was the kind of person who liked to fight. "Okay, since no one quits, then let's go. Let's make a deal. Listen to my orders. Anyone who doesn't listen to me and acts on his own will be kicked out of the hunting team. Xueqi knew what these kids were afraid of, so he used the word hunting team to threaten them. These kids didn't have a good temper, but it was simple. You only needed to know what they cared about. Sure enough, they were much more obedient this time. But when it came to actual action, it was still not so smooth. By the river bank, the two warriors who were in charge of guarding stood not far away. They smiled as they watched Xueqi instructing the kids to fish in a hurry. Xueqi was so angry that he beat the kids up directly. The kids who were beaten up rolled on the ground, wiped the blood on their faces, and got up with a grin. They continued to pull the rope with a smile, and didn't care at all. The eyes of these little brats, which were usually dull, were all shining today. Especially when they saw the fish being pulled out of the water, they couldn't wait to jump a few times to vent their excitement. If it weren't for the fact that these fish were too aggressive and could scrape off their flesh with one bite, they would have rushed over to hold the fish and take a bite to mark it to show their sovereignty. For a few days, Xueqi took them to fish. There were many fish in the river, and they had a lot to catch every day. Even if they ate as much as they couldn't finish it all. However, these kids were probably afraid of hunger. When there was plenty of food, they would think of saving it. Some of them kept the experience that their parents had passed on to them, and kept the habit of hoarding food before the winter came. And some of them just followed the trend. They saw what others did, and they followed. These days were the happiest days for these kids since they lived in the cave. They looked more and more energetic day by day. Those who were sleepy in the morning woke up earlier than Xueqi. Xueqi was woken up early in the morning. At night, they would lie on the ground and stare at the big fish hanging above the cave. Even after the fire was extinguished, they continued to stare. Xueqi could still hear their laughter in the middle of the night, which made his hair stand on end. Really? What the fuck? Chapter 12. Just like how a poor man would continue to be excited after becoming rich overnight, the kids in the orphan cave had been in a state of extreme excitement these days. The result of this excitement was fighting. Outside of fishing hours, fights happened frequently in the orphan cave. In the past they were fighting for food, but now they were fighting for food. Sometimes, they would bring back their trophies. If anyone took the wrong fish, they would beat them without hesitation. Now, it was no longer a one-on-one fight. After Xueqi instilled in them the idea that a small group was another form of a hunting group, these children now gathered in groups of 5. Of course, they would fight against each other in groups, which was more intense than before. Xueqi sat next to them and sighed. They deserved it. After seeing a fight between two groups because of a kid who took the wrong fish, Xueqi looked at the mess in the orphan cave. He thought for a while, and then fixed his eyes on a smooth stone wall near the entrance of the cave. A long time ago, when the people in the tribe lived here, they polished the stone wall and carved words on it. Later, when the kids lived here, they rarely added words on the stone wall. Even if the kids in the orphan cave were bored or had a sudden inspiration to draw, they would only draw on the wall close to the ground. If the wall was higher, there would only be traces left from many years ago. Different times, different methods and depths of carving were also different. Some were painted with pigments made of plant pigments, while some were carved with stone knives. Many of the traces were blurred and discolored, and the original appearance could not be seen clearly. It would be a waste to just leave it there. Xueqi called the kids who were too excited and energetic, and asked them to pick up stones and start polishing the wall. There were some bigger stones in the depths of the cave, and they worked together to move them out. To polish the wall, they had to step on these stones, or they would not be tall enough. Now that they had something to do, these kids became more well-behaved. Besides, it was Xueqi's order, so no one objected. Even if they were unwilling, they would still take the stones to polish the wall. Because the walls had already been polished, he was only rubbing away the surface marks. When he felt that it was almost done, Xueqi took the charred tree branch and stepped on the rocks below. He wrote 5 groups from 1 to 5 on the wall. Who was the first group? Who were the 5 members of the second group? He explained everything clearly to them. To be safe, Xueqi even wrote down the names of the members of each group below the numbers of each group. Every once in a while, the tribe would send people to the cave to teach the kids the most basic things, such as counting, some common words, and so on. Xueqi learned the words here, but the kids in the cave were not willing to listen before, so they learned very little. Every time someone came, only Xueqi would listen carefully for a while. The kids in the cave all wore a stone card around their necks, and their names were written on the stone card. Even if they did not know how to write, and could not recognize many words, they could still recognize their own names. After writing down the names, the groups were divided, and the fish they brought back had to be written down. Xueqi only wanted to write down a number to record how many fish each group caught, but the kids were not satisfied. Looking at the fish hanging above the cave, Xueqi used a charcoal stick to draw some simple strokes on the cave wall. It was an abstract fish. One stroke was enough for each fish, as long as they could tell it was a fish. Finally, the kids were satisfied. They even asked the person in their group who was the best at counting to verify whether the number of fish drawn by Xueqi on the cave wall was the same as the number of fish they hung on the wall. Each fish was just a stroke, and there were only dozens of fish here, so it did not take much effort. Anyway, they had nothing to do. Plus, the cave was big enough, and the wall was wide enough, so it was not a problem to draw 1,000 fish. The place where Xueqi drew the fish happened to have a high vent on the opposite wall. During the day, Yangguang's light would shine into the cave wall, so the calligraphy and paintings on the wall could be seen clearly. Therefore, every day when they were not fishing, the 5 children would sit together in the cave and weave straw ropes. After a while, they would look up at the wall of the cave and count the fish in their group. Then they would count the fish hanging on their territory. Because of this, the kids' counting ability improved rapidly. In the past, they would rather use a stone stick than count, but now, they could count dozens of times a day without being urged. Xian, is it 12 after 10? It's 11. Oh, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's not right, Xian. Why are there only 14 fish in our group? There are 15 on the wall. There's one missing. Who stole our fish? As he spoke, the kid and the other 4 in his group held wooden sticks and stones, looking at the other kids in the cave with gloomy eyes. Xueqi took a deep breath and pointed at the wall with the branch. Don't you see that there's a thick stroke on the fish at the front? That means you've already eaten it. You ate it last night. Do you want to spit out the food in your stomach to make sure? I can help you. Seems like it. The kid tilted his head and thought for a while. Then he calmed down and threw away the stick. He sat down with the other 4 and continued to weave straw rope, as if nothing had happened. Xian, I heard from Uncle Gu that tomorrow's weather will be good. Are we still going to the river tomorrow? A kid asked expectantly. The other kids also pricked up their ears and stared at Xueqi with bright eyes, as if their hearts would be broken if Xueqi said no. Yes, as usual tomorrow. Xueqi walked out of the cave and looked at the sky. Now more than 20 kids in the cave were moving together. They were greedy and wished they could fish by the riverbank all day long. But they also knew that it was best to move together with others, and they had to do so. The first reason was that they couldn't get stone worms. Xueqi had tried many kinds of worms that could be found in the tribe, but stone worms were the best for catching fish. Xueqi wouldn't give any stone worms to those who didn't listen to him. You don't listen to him and still want stone worms? Fine, you can go and dig them yourself. Without Caesar, you might not be able to get one even if you dug for half a day. Those stone worms moved much faster than earthworms underground. If they couldn't catch them in time, they would have to go back empty-handed. These days, it was Caesar who helped them dig out stone worms. The second reason why they had to move together was that they couldn't get the small black pieces that could float on the water. To get that, they had to catch a worm that lived in the black swamp. Unfortunately, except for Caesar, they couldn't get close to the black swamp. Because of this, Caesar's status in the cave had improved a lot. At least now, the kids didn't look at Caesar as if they were looking at food anymore. Some smart kids even learned to please him. They had seen Caesar gnawing animal bones before, so they gave Caesar fish bones. Unfortunately, Caesar had no interest in fish bones at all. Anyway, the relationship between these kids and Caesar had improved a lot. Xueqi didn't have to worry about when these kids would unite and roast Caesar. The next day, Xueqi was woken up early by these kids. He ran to the gravel field to dig out stone worms. Every time Caesar dug out a worm, Xueqi would give one to each team leader. A stone worm could be used 2 to 3 times. After digging it out, the worm would be cut in half. In a few minutes, the 2 halves would be able to move independently, turning from 1 worm into 2. If given more time, they would be able to grow as long as they were before they were cut. When everything was ready, Xueqi led them to the riverbank again. The warriors guarding the riverbank had changed, but they soon became familiar with Xueqi. For the past 2 days, they had seen Xueqi take the kids from the cave to fish here. Every day, he would give them a fish. So they had a good impression of Xueqi. Even the kids from the cave had changed a lot. Seeing the river, these kids couldn't hold back anymore. They rushed to throw the bait to catch the fish. But Xueqi suddenly stopped them. Back. Everyone back off. Don't touch the water. Don't throw the bait yet. Xueqi grabbed the kid who was rushing in the front and threw him back. He frowned and looked at the river. Something was wrong today. Chapter 13. Today's weather was really clear. The river was also very calm, very quiet, and there was no wind. A few days ago, the water on the riverbank would wash over the shoals, but today, there was no such situation. It was too calm, and a little strange. The river was not clear. The shoals were fine, but a meter deeper, the situation under the water could not be seen clearly. In such a dangerous world that couldn't be judged by common sense, one couldn't underestimate any detail. Neglect meant death. What's more, this river was regarded by the people in the tribe as a high-risk area, just like the Black Swamp. Fishing in the past few days did not mean it was safe. Seeing Xueqi like this, the excited children stopped their movements and stepped back. They were greedy and not smart, but they were not stupid. Everyone cherished their lives. Besides, the things that happened recently made them trust Xueqi a lot more. After stepping back, they all looked at Xueqi. Xueqi stood on the shore, looking at the calm river in front of him, thinking. The river was still calm. Except for this, it was not much different from usual. The river did not change color, and nothing suspicious appeared. Was he too suspicious? Suddenly, white translucent creatures appeared in front of him. They looked like inverted shuttlecocks, with many whisker-like tentacles. They swam along with the tentacles. With the previous experience, Xueqi knew that this situation would not appear for no reason. There should be such creatures in the water, and they were very dangerous. Xueqi took the straw rope tied to the stone worm and threw it into the water. The stone worm fell into the water less than 2 meters away from the shore. After the stone worm fell into the water, Xueqi did not feel the fierce pull of the piranhas biting the bait through the straw rope. The black thing floating on the water was trembling slightly. If one did not look carefully, they would only think it was the stone worm struggling below. However, after fishing for a few days, Xueqi was very familiar with how a stone worm struggled. But the fact was that the black thing on the water surface was trembling less than before, and it seemed to be trembling even less. Xueqi pulled the straw rope back. When they saw the stone worm's appearance, the children who had been staring at this side all gathered around. The stone worm was not bitten off, but its whole body was white and shrunk. It was still stiff, maintaining the twisted state it was in when it struggled underwater. Putting the changed stone worm on the ground, Xueqi used the back of the stone knife to hit the worm's body. Crack! After a slight crisp sound, the stone worm broke, completely without the soft body of a normal stone worm. The children standing next to him were frightened. If a person were to enter the water, would they also become dry, hard, and brittle, and break with a snap? No one dared to try. They did not even dare to touch the water and stayed far away. Xueqi threw a few more stone worms into the water. Every time, the situation was the same. After a few seconds, they would become brittle dried worms. Even after half a day in the water, not a single fish took the bait. Either the fish are not interested in the dried worms, or there are no fish around today. Now that there is something terrible in the water, the fish may have all run away. They will probably only come back after that creature leaves. Xueqi said as he took back the straw rope. Then, when will the fish come back? A child asked. Now they were not afraid of the ferocious piranhas at all. Instead, they were looking forward to seeing them. One day without seeing them would make them panic. I don't know. Let's come back tomorrow. Xueqi shook his head. He went to the 2 warriors who were in charge of guarding the riverbank and told them not to let the tribesmen go into the water. He left a dried worm for them to study. Let's go back. Let's make more straw rope for next time. Xueqi advised. If the straw rope was not made well, it would not be strong enough after 2 uses, so it would consume a lot of energy. Today was a good day to rest. Xueqi let them gather enough grass and sat in a cave to make straw rope. Although the children were scared when they saw the stone worm, they were more unwilling to give up. If they could catch fish today, how many would they catch? At least 4? If Caesar could dig up more stone worms, they might be able to catch even more. For the sake of their lives, they could not catch any today. According to Xian's words, they would come back tomorrow. But what if it was the same tomorrow? What if they could not catch fish the day after tomorrow, or the day after that? It was scary just thinking about it. The children in the cave were anxious. When they returned to the cave to make straw rope, they were absent-minded. Xian sat at the entrance of the cave, basking in the sun while thinking about the creature he just saw and the coming winter. On this day, many people who went to the riverbank to fish were driven back by the guards. A few days ago, the people living in the Mountain Foot district found that the children who lived in the cave only ate and slept, and rarely came out of the cave to steal things, had become more diligent. Those children went out every day and came back from the riverbank in the afternoon when it was time for lunch. Every time they came back, they would use straw rope to drag back some strange big-headed fish with sharp teeth. Some curious people followed them to watch. They also wanted to learn how to fish, but first of all, it was difficult for them to dig out stoneworms, and they couldn't use other things to replace them. They couldn't catch fish just by throwing straw ropes. Secondly, even if they caught stoneworms or used other things to replace them, it was difficult to catch fish as easily as Xian and the others. There were a few times when they caught unknown creatures, and their bodies swelled up after being pricked. Finally, those people noticed that Xian used a black thing that floated on the water. Compared with Xian's fishing equipment, they only lacked that thing. When they did not use that thing, the harvest was not ideal. Xian analyzed the reason. It was probably because those piranhas did not like to live underwater. When they threw the bait with straw rope, it sank. Floating objects such as wooden blocks did not last long, and soon the bait would be dragged down by the creatures in the water. And once the stoneworms came into contact with the soil and stones, they would easily escape. These two factors together led to the poor harvest. These days, Xian asked Caesar to help him catch some insects in the black swamp. He made a lot of small black pieces and used them to exchange for some meat and furs from the people in the Mountain Foot district. There was not much meat, so he distributed it to the children in the cave on the day of the exchange. As for the furs, even if they were not of good quality, it would make them feel better in the coming winter. Therefore, in addition to the children in the cave, some people in the Mountain Foot district who did not go out to hunt were also fishing. No one would complain about the lack of food. Winter was coming, and they would feel uneasy if they did not store more food. But today, they were all disappointed. Xian looked at another group of people who came back from the river with their heads down. He sighed. Suddenly, Caesar, who was lying next to him, stood up and stared in one direction. Xian looked over. There were a few big rocks about 20 meters away from the cave. Usually, if the weather was good, some children would lie on the rocks to bask in the sun. But now that there was something to do, no one would go there. At this time, there was no one on the rocks, but Xian saw a little bit of animal skin on the side. Even if it was just a little bit, Xian could recognize it. It was Sai, who used to rob Xian's things. A few days ago, he was beaten down by Xian at the training ground. Usually, Yi and Zhan would be with Sai. But today, they were here again. The day before yesterday, when Xian and Caesar went to the edge of the black swamp to catch insects, the three of them blocked Xian at the gravel field. They wanted to snatch the small black pieces that could float on the water surface. Both sides had a fight, but at that time, there were children in the cave, so the three of them quickly ran away. Today, the three of them did not give up, and wanted to steal something from here. They did not dare to rob the fish, because the tribe had a rule that no one was allowed to rob the children's food. But other fishing tools were not included in the food. Xian touched his chin and patted Caesar, telling him to wait for a while. He turned around and went into the cave. "Kids," Xian said to the people in the cave, "you have done well recently, and have hunted a lot of prey. That's good. If this goes on, and with the food distributed by the tribe, we won't be hungry this winter. But, what if someone wants to rob us at this time?" At first, when they heard Xian's voice, they thought they could go out to fish, and their eyes lit up. But after hearing the whole sentence, they realized it was not the case, and their eyes dimmed again. But after hearing the whole sentence, their dimmed eyes were replaced by anger. Rob. Beat. Not the fish but only the tools? Even the tools were not allowed. But what was steal? What? You said that taking without asking was stealing? Wasn't that the same as robbing? Beat them all. Xian once said that for these little brats, eating was the most beautiful word in the world, and food was the specific interpretation of this word. Whoever wanted to steal their food was the thing they cared about the most, and they would fight with their lives on the line. At this time, he and his 2 followers were hiding behind a big rock outside the cave, discussing how to take the black pieces and leave when the people in the cave were not paying attention. While they were talking in a low voice, Caesar suddenly jumped down from above and threw himself at the 3 of them. It was so sudden that the 3 of them were scared and jumped away reflexively. Sai, who had dodged, was still in shock. He held the stick in his hand and stared at Caesar, thinking that if the wolf took one more step forward, he would wave the stick. Sai was so absorbed in his thoughts that he did not notice the surroundings until Yi and John poked him. "What are you poking me for? Can't you see that I'm—" Sai turned his head and roared. But before he finished his words, Sai looked at the direction where Yi and John were pointing and saw more than 20 little bastards standing at the entrance of the cave. They were holding wooden sticks, stones and other things, and were glaring at them with ferocious eyes. Chapter 14. Sai and his 2 lackeys failed to steal anything. Instead, they were chased by more than 20 aggressive kids in the cave and had to flee for their lives. That afternoon, almost all the people living in the Mountain Foot district saw this shocking scene. After all, it was usually Sai, Yi, and John who bullied the other kids. In the past, the kids in the cave were not so united. They basically acted alone, and more than half of them were beaten by Sai and his followers. But now, no one had expected that the kids in the orphan cave would be so united. More than 20 of them surrounded Sai and his 2 companions and beat them up. If it were not for their parents who came to rescue them, they would have been beaten up even more severely. Because of this incident, the people in the Mountain Foot district had a new understanding of the kids in the cave. It turned out that these kids could still unite and fight against outsiders. Those who had ulterior motives hid their thoughts when they saw this. Fighting didn't matter. The kids in the tribe were not afraid of it, and the adults didn't take it seriously. But being besieged by more than 20 kids was another thing. Even the kids couldn't do it. Who would be stupid enough to ask for trouble? After dealing with Sai, the troublemaker, Xueqi called the group of irritable kids back to the cave. After being chased and beaten, they should have vented some of their resentment, so they came back to do business. Some kids in the cave saw that Xueqi was exchanging fish for animal skins, so they came to ask for help from Xueqi. Those kids who were appointed by Xueqi to be in charge of the group were smart. They didn't want to get in touch with the people in the tribe, so they asked for help from Xueqi. In some kids' memories, they vaguely remembered that someone had taught them to prepare 2 things in winter. One was food, and the other was fur. The former would keep them from starving to death, and the latter would keep them from freezing to death. Even with the fur distributed by the tribe, there would still be kids who got sick every winter because of the weather. They would die before they could be treated, and couldn't survive the harsh winter. Those who had lived in the cave for several years were scared of the winter in their memories, because they couldn't eat enough and sleep well. They were often woken up by the cold, and people around them died. Therefore, when they had food, they were willing to exchange some of it for fur. With the first, there would be a second, third, and fourth person coming to Xueqi. Xueqi recorded the number of fish caught by each group on the stone wall. He would distribute the recorded amount to each group after they exchanged the animal skins. Just as he was thinking, a person walked in from outside the cave. The children in the cave fell silent when they saw the person. Soon, 5 of them gathered together and looked at the person standing at the entrance of the cave vigilantly. Xueqi knew the man. He was also a kid from the orphan cave, named Moer. Moer's father was an excellent warrior. However, when Moer was very young, he had an accident during a hunting trip. After that, Moer's mother remarried. According to the rules of the tribe, Moer had to follow her. However, Moer was not the only child in the new family. Conflicts would always arise, and fights were inevitable. In fact, Moer's original name was only Air. His father's name was Mo. Later, Moer combined the 2 characters and gave himself a new name. Moer carried a stone knife that was almost as long as he was and walked into the cave. He glanced around the cave and sniffed. He raised his head in confusion and saw many fishes with sharp teeth and big mouths hanging above his head, staring at him with their dark red eyes. Moer jumped back a step and pulled out the stone knife from his back. His whole body was tense. When Moer pulled out the knife, the others who mistakenly thought that Moer was going to rob the fish also stood up with their tools, staring at Moer vigilantly. "What? Do you want to rob the fish? Although they had lived together in the same cave, since Xian divided them into groups, the 5 of them became a group. In the eyes of these kids, other than the 5 of them in the same group, everyone else was an outsider, so they had to be vigilant. All right, put down your knives and sticks. The one with the stone, don't think that I can't see your hands behind your back. Put them down. Xian shouted at the kids in the cave, then walked to Amor and pointed at the fish above his head. They're dead. Amor frowned and carefully looked at the fishes with sharp teeth. After confirming that they were really dead and posed no threat, he slowly put down the knife. It was hard to hold such a big knife all the time. After putting away the knife, Amor looked around again. Seeing this, Xian guessed that he was looking for Ku, so he said, Ku went to the mountainside and won't come back in winter. Uncle Gu asked me to take care of this place. Amor nodded and said nothing. For him, it didn't matter who was in charge of the cave, but he was not used to the changes in the cave. With the knife on his back, Amor continued to walk into the cave. But this time was different. In the past, when he left for a period of time and came back, the cave was full of kids lying on the ground. No one cared when he left or came back. But this time it was different. Everyone in the cave was staring at him. Wherever he went, they stared at him and refused to come close. While Amor was wondering why the cave changed so much after he left for a period of time, the other kids were also wondering why they were so smart now. With one more person, they would have to share some of the prey they hunted. No matter how they thought about it, they were reluctant. Everyone had their own thoughts and glanced at Xian at the same time, waiting for Xian to make a decision. Xian had heard from Ku that Mor's father had left him a lot of good things. The knife Mor was using was left by his father. Therefore, compared to the other kids in the cave, Mor could be counted as a rich second generation. However, this rich second generation was a bit different. He had a good life, but he would come back to the cave every once in a while. Several times, Mor was dragged back to the mountain by his mother who had remarried. But after a while, he would come back to the cave again. Maybe it was because he had a fight with the kids of the new family, or maybe it was because of some other reasons. No one asked, and Mor never told anyone. He was a man of few words, except for nodding or shaking his head. Otherwise he would fight directly. The other kids in the cave only had one impression of him. He was very good at fighting, and no one could beat him. Even Ku, who had gone to the mountainside, was defeated by Mor. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, the kids in the cave would not rob Mor's things. Of course they would target the weakest one first. And those who tried to rob Mor had all been injured by him. Mor, did you spend the winter in the cave? Xian asked. Mor nodded. Okay. There were 25 kids in the cave, and I divided them into 5 groups. Now that you are back, then. The other kids in the cave suddenly became nervous. They stared at Xian with their eyes wide open. Many of them even shook their heads at Xian, as if they were afraid that Xian would not see it. They were clearly telling Xian that they would not accept any new members. Then you can join our group, Xian said. The other 4 groups all let out a sigh of relief. The nervousness on their faces faded away, and they could not help but feel happy. As for the 2 oldest kids in Xian's group, they were not happy about it. But since Xian said so, they did not object. They turned back to continue weaving straw ropes, and even glared at Mor. Mor did not care about the others' obvious rejection. At least on the surface, Xian could not see any resistance from Mor. Mor was still as silent as before. At night, some kids had already gone to bed. Some who could not sleep because they were worried about whether they could catch the fish the next day were weaving straw ropes absent-mindedly. They made a mess of straw ropes. No matter how hard they tried, they would always make mistakes. When they were angry, they would bite the straw ropes with their teeth. Xian was worried. The fire near the entrance of the cave was still burning, and the curtain at the entrance of the cave was not completely pulled down. In the dark night, the firelight coming from the cave was very obvious. The night swallows flying outside would also avoid the firelight and watch from afar. Mor walked to the entrance of the cave with his saber on his back. He put the big saber on his back aside, and pulled out 2 short sabers from his waist. One in each hand, he held them in reverse. He still could not hide his breath like the totem warriors. Therefore, as soon as he walked out of the cave, the night swallow flying in the dark sky noticed him. Xian sat near the fire, close to the entrance of the cave. He could see the sky outside the cave from here. There were 2 crescent moons in the sky. Yes, 2. When Xueqi first saw the moons in the night sky, he realized that this was an unexplainable fact. This was a new world that was far different from the one he was familiar with. Even all the rules and experiences he had mastered might not be applicable here. In this season, the 2 moons would move away from each other in opposite directions. The crescent moons could not bring much light to the night. Compared to a few days ago, the night was much darker. The night was getting darker and darker. When the 2 moons completely disappeared, winter would officially begin. Xueqi's eyes fell on Emoer, who was outside the cave. Judging from the way he held the saber and the way he was standing, Xueqi knew that he was a veteran. When the kids in the cave were still sleeping, Emoer began to practice his saber skills. Even though his father was gone, there was still someone to teach him. Holding the saber, Emoer stood there quietly, as if he was staring at the night sky in a daze. But Xueqi knew that Emoer was waiting for his prey to come to him. In the dark night swallow flashed around the cave. Their figures could not be seen clearly in the dark, and only slight sounds could be heard. There were many night swallow outside the cave, but they were hesitant because of the fire coming out from the cave behind Emoer. Only a few dared to rush up. Xueqi heard a rapid sound. There was a night swallow approaching. Emoer, who was standing there, suddenly moved. He held the saber in his hand and slashed to the left. His move was very straightforward, without any hesitation. Ding! He missed. Because he was close to the entrance of the cave, there was a flash of dazzling fire when the saber hit the wall. The night swallow had left, but there was a half-palm-long wound on Emoer's arm. The wound was caused by the shovel-like beak of the night swallow. But the night swallow was affected by Emoer's saber and changed its angle when it attacked. So the wound on Emoer's arm was not deep. If he had been hit by the night swallow's beak from the front, he would have at least lost a piece of his flesh, instead of the superficial wound on Emoer's arm. An excellent hunter should not only know how to hide, but also know how to be patient. Emoer did not show any pain because of the shovel-like attack. He did not even frown. His hand holding the saber was still steady, and he looked the same as before. He did not treat the wound, but just let the blood flow out little by little. The night swallow flashing in the dark night seemed to have smelled the blood in the air, and started to move restlessly. Xueqi could hear more and more small sounds of the night swallow flying in the air. Compared with the other kids in the cave, Emoer was too hard-working. When Ku was still in the cave, he did not understand why Emoer was practicing with the night swallow. In the eyes of the other kids in the cave, Emoer was looking for death. After Emoer left the cave, Ku muttered that he could live and eat well, but why did he come to this poor place and work so hard? Caesar was also a little irritable because of the night swallow outside the cave. Xueqi comforted it and got up to take it into the cave. However, after 2 steps, Xueqi stopped. He heard a sharp buzzing sound. At first, Xueqi thought it was an auditory hallucination. But then he wondered if it was because he had been thinking too much or something else that caused the tinnitus. But then he realized something was wrong. The sharp buzzing sound was getting louder and louder, as if the object that made the sound was approaching quickly. Ding! Another sound of the stone knife colliding with the stone wall. At the same time, the sharp buzzing sound Xueqi heard stopped abruptly. Xueqi looked over there. Emoer was holding the knife in his hand, and the blade had already pierced through the body of a night swallow. The night swallow flapped its wings twice and stopped moving. Blood flowed down along the gray blade. The night swallows in the night sky changed their direction and flew further away, hovering in a place not too far away. Emoer swung the knife and threw the penetrated night swallow into the cave, where it fell beside the big knife on his back. Then he continued to watch, waiting for the next prey. Caesar bared its teeth at the dead night swallow, and wanted to bite it. Xueqi stared at the night swallow's shovel-like beak thoughtfully. Add more Sundays. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.